Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's meeting of the Children and Families Scrutiny Board. We're anticipating a number of journalism students from Leeds Trinity University will be coming along to observe the meeting at some point. The meeting is being webcast on the Council's website, so any interested members of the public that are unable to observe in person can still watch the meeting remotely. Before we get into the agenda, I'd just like to go around and ask everyone to formally introduce themselves. And if I can ask people to turn their microphone on when they introduce themselves and remember to turn it off. So to kick off, I'm Councillor Alan Lamb. I'm the chair of the board. I represent the Wetherby ward, and I'll go around to my right.
Good morning, I'm Angela Brogden, the Principal Scrutiny Advisor for the board.
Good morning, everybody. Ryan Stevenson, representing the Harewood ward.
Good morning, everybody. Linda Richards, representing Wetherby ward.
Morning, everybody. Sandy Lay, representing Otley and Yeadon ward.
Oh, so I was looking for the green light, sorry. Good morning, everybody. Councillor Anne Forsyth, Farnham Wortley ward.
Good morning, Celia Foote, school staff representative.
Morning, Helen Bellamy, school staff representative.
Good morning, I'm Jacqueline Ward and I'm parent governor representative for secondary schools.
Morning, Andrew Graham, representing the Church of England Diocese of Leeds.
Morning, Laura Whitaker, representing Young Lives Leeds.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dave Clark. I'm the head of learning improvement with Leeds City Council.
Good morning, my name is Barbara Temple. My title is Children Missing Out on Education and Exclusions Lead, and I'm lead officer for elective home education.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Val Waite. I'm head of learning inclusion within Children and Families Directorate.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Tim Pouncey. I'm the Chief Officer for Resources and Strategy within the Children and Families Directorate.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Julie Longworth and I'm Deputy Director for Children and Families with Leeds City Council.
Morning, everyone. I'm Abigail Marshall-Cuttung, representing Little London Woodhouse and the City Centre.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Councillor Caroline Gruen and I represent Bramley and Stanningley.
Good morning, it's John Illingworth from Kirkstall ward.
Morning, Councillor Jess Lennox from Crossgates and Winmore, and I'm substituting for Councillor Hannah Bithell.
Morning, I'm Emma Flint, Councillor in Wheatwood ward.
Good morning, Councillor Karen Renshaw, representing Alcyon Robin Hood ward.
Good morning, Harriet Spate, Governance Officer.
Thank you and welcome everybody. Particularly warm welcome to Laura, whose first meeting it is today. And as you'll soon discover, it's well known this is the best scrutiny board in the city, if not the country. It's a well-known fact. So you're very welcome and please feel free to get involved in the discussion. So we've got quite a hefty agenda to work our way through this morning. So I'm going to ask Harriet to take us through the first 5 items of business before we get into the meat of the agenda.
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item number 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under agenda item number 2, there are no items for exclusion today. Under agenda item number 3, there are no late items of business. Under agenda item number 4, please could I invite board members to declare any interest? Take that as none, thank you. And under agenda item number 5, the board has received apologies from Councillor Senior and Councillor Bithell, with Councillor Lennox here today as substitute, and also from co-opted member Tony Britton. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Harriet. And so we've also had apologies from Sal, the Director of Children's Services, who's unwell, I understand. So we sent him our best wishes. We've had apologies from Councillor Jonathan Pryor, who I understand is covering for the leader of council somewhere today. And we've also had apologies from Shaheen, who's the Deputy Director for Learning, but I think we're quite well covered, and I understand Councillor Venner's well briefed on everything. We'll get her to take us through shortly. So if we come on to item 6, which is the minutes of previous meeting held on the 13th of October 2021. So that's pages 7 to 12 of the agenda. So first of all, can I just ask those present to approve that they were an accurate record, please? Yeah, I'm seeing nods and no dissent. Thank you very much. And has anyone got any matters arising that we're not covering elsewhere on the agenda that they'd like to raise now? No? Splendid. Okay, so we can now get into the meat of the agenda. So we're starting off on item 7, which is the inquiry into exclusions, elective home education and off-rolling. We're calling it part 2, session 1, which makes it sound like quite an epic proportioned inquiry. We did start pre-COVID, have had to pause for some time, and but we're ready and raring to go with this once again. So this is the first session. The officers have all introduced themselves already. So perhaps if I can ask Councillor Venner initially to introduce herself, and then I think it would be for you, Councillor Venner and Julie, to make any opening remarks, and then we can get into discussion and debate. So thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Fiona Venner. I'm the Executive Board Member for Children and Adult Social Care, Early Years and Health Partnerships. So the way Councillor Pryor and I cover the children's portfolio is that I basically have everything to do with children that's not education. So I've got children's social care, looked after children, youth justice service, early years, and Jonathan covers everything to do with schools and learning. So it's a bit unfortunate the way the papers have fallen that he's at conference, a Eurocities event today, and all the papers on the education side. So I have read them all. I do know his portfolio fairly well. So, and there are some overlaps, particularly with early years. So where it's appropriate, I will answer questions or comments. And Julie's here as well, the Deputy Director on the social care side. But as the Chair said, Sal's sent apologies and Shaheen. So we've got other officers here. We've got Dave and Val who'll be able to answer questions on the papers. So I'll leave them to make introductory remarks, if that's okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Julie, are you starting off?
Yeah, I'm starting off, but I'll be very brief because as Councillor Venner said, we've got key officers here who are going to give their own introductions to each paper, and I'm conscious that we've got a lot to get through. So I'm going to hand over to Val, who will give the introduction on the first paper.
Okay, thank you.
So I've already said good morning, but I'm going to say good morning again to everybody. The paper that we've got in front of you that's within the pack is focused completely on elective home education, because we've divided up this inquiry into different aspects. So a later paper will come to this board, which focuses on the exclusions agenda, fixed term exclusions and permanent exclusions. And there's a whole series of meetings, workshops that are planned that surround the whole of that agenda. But for this meeting, it's very focused on elective home education. And also I was asked to talk about attendance at this meeting, because I think from the last scrutiny board, there was an interest where we are with attendance generally. So if I update on attendance, first of all, as you will know, we have figures around attendance that are lagged. So all of the schools submit data that goes to the DFE. The DFE then collate all of those numbers for attendance across the whole country, and then they provide the verified data that comes back to us. In terms of attendance, as you would imagine, the last data that was collected, you can't really compare it to previous years because of the COVID and schools being closed to some young people and the coding system that was used for young people that were not at school because of COVID. But what we have is an overall picture that has come through from the verified attendance data. And this is the data that is received from the DFE, and it is for the autumn and the spring terms 2020-21. We're still waiting for the summer term of 2020-21. the way it's been processed by the DFE, rather than it being overall numbers of attendance, they've done it the other way around because of those irregularities in terms of the coding, and actually presented it in terms of the sessions that have been missed within schools. So the picture that we have now, the overall sessions for those 2 terms in 2021 is the sessions missed in Leeds over this period are 30.5 sessions, whereas the picture in England is slightly lower than that at 29.4% sessions. We've put that, when we've looked at the data, that absolutely correlates to the number of incidents within the city, because we did at one point have a higher level of COVID and higher levels of schools having to close because of COVID. The pupils that in secondary schools miss the most in terms of sessions. So they were 35.4% that was missed in schools, in secondary schools in the city, compared to England, which was 34.1%. So not huge differences there. Again, in primary, the difference was only around 1% compared to Leeds and compared to the rest of the country. And special schools, we did much better in special schools. Our special schools remained open for lots of our sessions and provided lots of education for our young people within the special schools. And that was 13.5% compared to England, which was 15.3% of sessions that were missed overall. In terms of the data that we have, because I know that colleagues like to know what's actually happening now within the city and the picture that we have in the current data. So what is happening is that the DFE are collecting data from schools on a daily basis. It is voluntary, it is not mandatory. So schools are deciding whether they actually submit that data on a daily basis to the DFE. Within Leeds, we've got around 35 to 45% of schools that are currently submitting the data. So we have to be very cautious actually in any conclusions that we make that is around that, because it is less than 50% of schools that are submitting the data that is through. However, from that data, the indicator, the last indicator that we had is that Leeds is marginally higher than the national figures in terms of our overall attendance. So we have higher attendance across primary, secondary and special schools than the national picture. But again, we do have to be very cautious about that data, as I say, because it is a limited percent of schools that are submitting it. We are not allowed to give specific detail around that data that's drilled down into specific, schools or into areas of the city. That is the DFE, because it is under data protection and submitted to the DFE. So those are the regulations that surround it. So I can just give you the overall picture of it. So that is the attendance picture. In terms of elective home education, so you have the papers that are in your pack around it, but if I can just give an overview and a quick summary that's around the elective home education. So the elective home education, the report outlines all the data and the trends on elective home education over the last 3 years. And you will see that in the pack, there are graphs that actually show the projections in terms of elective home education and also some of the trends. It's also, again, a word of caution that it must be noted that there's no national official data collection for elective home education. And the information provided is through the annual ADCS survey. So that is the Director of Children's Services survey that is held, and also through our links with regional partners. And as many members will know, a Dfe consultation was held in 2018 around elective home education. That consultation was looking at the powers and the duties of local authorities around elective home education, and also looking at the duties of parents, particularly around registration. And the overall picture was one where it consulted on monitoring registration of children that are not attending school but being elective home educated, and also looking at the support for home education. The outcome from that consultation was published around the same time that we had new guidance that was also published, and that was 2019. The overall picture that we have is that there are no significant changes being proposed that are around the LA duties and powers specifically. However, they have gone to further consultation, which is now closed, which was very specifically on the registration of children that are being electively home educated and a duty upon parents. So that now is in process. No legislation as yet, but we understand that there is a will to move towards creating that legislation, which will mean that all children that are being electively home educated, the parents will need to register them with the local authority. But as I say, as yet, there is no legislation around it. They were possibly waiting for a window that is around that, and we've not had the outcome. However, there are no suggestions to give powers or duties to monitor the overall suitability of education on a long-term basis. So at the very beginning, when a young person is electively home educated, then yes, the local authority asks for those education plans. But if we do not see that there's any safeguarding issues, then there are no duties being proposed for the local authority to be able to continue that very, very close scrutiny and very, very close monitoring. There's also a lot of the feedback that was given to the DFE was around what suitable education is, because in law it's just defined as age, aptitude and ability and special educational needs, if any. However, you can imagine that actually determining whether a particular programme that a parent has determined is suitable for their child, what suitable actually means. But the government have made it very, very clear that they are not going to go further down that road in terms of the suitability of education, because they absolutely believe that elective home education is a right, and parents have that right and the right to choose that if it's a philosophical judgment on the part of parents. The only concern that the DFE are looking at around the safeguarding of children, and that they do get access to education, and that they are safe, and that they are cared for, and that they are well. And that is where, again, the DFE in the consultation feedback are saying very clearly that those are the powers that local authorities already have. Those are the duties that local authorities already have. And it is those powers that should be used where there is a concern around a young person, not just treating all elective home education as if there is a concern. And I think that is really important to note, that it is often a philosophical judgment. So the report, there's lots of headlines that are in the report. We've got lots of numbers in there, lots of figures. You will see that the overall picture, as we have gone through COVID, is where the number of young people being electively home educated has shot up massively. And those numbers, it's just continued to rise throughout the pandemic. In 2019, 2020, we had 618 children recorded at the end of the year. In 2020-21, by the end of the year, we had 907 young people that recorded, which is a 47% increase in the numbers of electively home educated young people compared to 2019-2020. And just to give you an idea of the numbers that were coming in 2020-21, we had 651 new notifications in the first term, and that's 377 just in the autumn term. So if you look at that the autumn term we had 651 compared to the previous year where we had 377 for the whole of the year. So you can see that the volume, and that first term, the notifications were coming in thick and fast into the local authority. The pattern has also changed. What we used to see within the elective home education when we looked at the trends was very much that the trend was those young people that were in those exam years, that were in secondary school. There often seemed to be a spike for those young people becoming electively home educated. What we have seen this year and over the pandemic is it's actually whole families that are making that choice about elective home education. So we are seeing whole families and therefore seeing larger numbers that are now within the primary sector as well as the secondary sector in terms of elective home education. And as you would imagine, the reason given, parents don't have to give a reason, but where they have given a reason, predominantly that reason is COVID related and anxieties that are related to COVID. Okay, I will stop there and hand back to you.
Okay, thank you, Julie. And just for completeness, do you have the data to hand for how many children there were in the city for each year? Because there's been a big increase, and I'm sure as a proportion it's going to be a big increase, but it's useful to know what proportion of the school age population it is. So we've got it in, just so we've got the full context.
I'll hand over to Barbara. Barbara is our lead, so she is working with all of those numbers, figures, and analysing all of that data on a daily basis. So I'll hand over to Barbara.
Hello. Yeah, it's currently about 0.5%. I would have to go back and check that because obviously the numbers of young people in the city vary, but we can come back to that and verify that again. It's one of the questions that we will be addressing with the ADCH survey that we'll be completing, but it has gone up significantly over the last year.
Okay. Okay, right. Well, if I could, just before we get into questions, if I can just welcome our guests who I understand are journalism students from Leeds Trinity. So you're very welcome to as I've said once already today, what is the best scrutiny board in the city. So you've picked the right meeting to come to, and it will keep you undoubtedly on the edge of your seats for the next about 7.5 hours that we so who has questions, please? Andrew. Yeah, I'll take them in the order I see them. Just keep your hand up while I get to everybody, but go ahead, Andrew.
I'm very struck by the amount of parents who choose not to give a reason as to why they electively home educate. And I completely appreciate that that's the individual parent prerogative. I just wonder whether any digging around that has been done, because obviously sometimes there's a perception that if it's a particular reason that could disadvantage the family in some way or another. So I just wonder whether there is any thoughts around why such a high percentage of parents choose not to share that information with us.
Usually when we're looking at when the reason comes in is when you're getting that notification from the parent. So the letter from the parent may indicate why. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. What we've seen in the last year is the use of a standardized letter, which is often available on elective home education websites, which basically follows the legislation that says, I wish to withdraw my young person from the school role under the rights that I have. So it won't necessarily say the reason. If we then get what we always do is ask the parent. It may not be one reason, is why I'm saying this is the difficulty always where you are trying to respond to, you can say, is it to do with COVID? Is it to do with your family situation? There could be a multiple reason, but parents sometimes are not forthcoming about that. They just say to us, this is the decision we've made at this time. We feel it's right for our young person. So yes, we always ask the question. We go back to that when we have that conversation with the parent, which we try to do as soon as we can. And of course, if it's something there where we feel that where we can help, because it's been a reaction to something and actually that's not something they really wanted to do, then we will help them to follow up on that. But I think what we need to be really clear about is that the EHE team looks at each case individually. If you see what I mean, we respond to that family and their circumstances, and each one of those is slightly different. So this is it is a bit of a national issue. Can I just say, it's not just Leeds where we have this. Quite a lot of people don't want to say why, and sometimes that's because parents don't want to categorize their reason. They just say, this is the reason we want to take this decision now.
Okay, did you want to come back, Andrew, or you're happy? Okay, thank you. Councillor Gruen, please.
Thank you. You've made it very clear that the local authority has absolutely no powers of scrutiny or oversight of the process. Do parents who are home educating have any right to professional guidance should they seek it? That's the first point. And the second one is it possible and should we track how many children educated at home come out of the process with formal qualifications? And again, you've given a very, very clear factual account of the situation. Does the council have a view about elected home education?
So I think that was the consultation that took part in 2018 was very much to give that opinion from local authorities, and lots of local authorities submitted information, as we did in Leeds, that were concerns around particular groups of young people that were being electively home educated. And absolutely, it was around those young people and about the qualification levels and the monitoring duties of a local authority. So local authorities made all of that representation. As I say, it was pulled all together within that consultation, and the thing that came out of it was really the registration of young people. Now, once you get the registration of young people and that it becomes mandatory, you can then start to look at the overall picture and you can start to look at the qualifications. At this point in time, young people that are electively home educated, there is no duty for them to take any exams at all. We do support in Leeds, so we do direct them. We give them lots of information of where they could undertake exams and courses that they could take. So we do support the families. We've got families that are very much wanting that information and wanting to engage with the local authority, and they do get all of that support. The bottom line in all of that is parents do have to pay for the exams themselves because they have made that choice to withdraw their child from education. So yes, you know, it's an ongoing issue really. One of the things in the consultation was very much about the support that could come from local authorities and whether there should be duties around that. But again, that doesn't seem to have been picked up through the consultation and doesn't seem to be in line to go forward for legislation.
If I rang you up and said, I'm educating my children at home and I've got some difficulty with this, I don't know, science program, that there would be no support, or would there be any support for that kind of request?
What we provide for all young people who become home educated is information on useful websites and resources. So what we don't have a group of teachers that could give you specific information on that. What we can, all parents receive that information at the point. And during COVID, we updated that because obviously, actually, it has been quite interesting how much new information has been put into the public domain. So actually, many home educating parents have never had so much resource that they could pull on as they have done. So I think that's a positive stroke in terms of what's happened in the last year.
Councillor Venner.
Thank you. I thought I'd just make a couple of points. We had a really interesting challenge a few years ago, and I'm trying to remember what group it came from. It might have been the Care Leaders Council. It's one of the young people involvement groups, but it was a challenge from a child who'd been home educated, who was now a young adult, who made the point that children who are home educated don't have access to support that other children have, and they were referring particularly to the clusters. I thought that was really interesting that obviously it's a parental choice to home educate, but it does mean by definition that not being in school means children don't have access to some provision that other children do through being in school. With regard to what our opinion is about home education, I think local authorities have always respected that some people choose to home educate for ideological reasons, and that's really thought out, and you know, parents put a lot of time and effort into providing appropriate educational programs. I think the concerns have already been touched on, which are the overrepresentation of particular groups like children with SEND needs, and where parents have felt perhaps it's not really a choice. They've felt they've had to withdraw their child because the child's not getting the support they need in school, particularly if they've got mental health or SEND needs. And also, of course, where where we've heard that parents have felt pressurised into it by schools, and obviously there's been national campaigning and research around this as well, around off-rolling, and so we've heard anecdotally of where parents have sort of almost been pressurised into signing a letter saying they want to home educate and then not been allowed to backtrack on that. But that is quite anecdotal. But that's one of the other concerns, where it's not really an ideological choice. It's a choice parents have felt forced into for different reasons. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Illingworth is next, please.
Going to ask Chair if there's any information about the financial effect on families who are home educating. I can well understand that it would have a very dramatic effect on money and income and expenditure and so forth. And I just wonder if this has been looked at.
I don't have any information that's on the financial impact. What we do have is sometimes that there is a misconception with parents that are electively home educating, and a thought that actually that they would receive the money that would have educated them within school and that exams would be paid for. And that is sometimes a very good conversation to have when parents are going down that route. So we always try to have those conversations with parents so that they understand all of the implications that are around it. As Councillor Venner says, a lot of parents, absolutely, it's a philosophical, ideological choice that they are going down, and the financial aspects are not the important part of it. For other families, sometimes that is a really good conversation to have when they understand the overall impact of that choice in terms of finance and also the responsibilities for that family. If they're in a situation where actually they feel it wasn't a choice they were making, but they're in a position where they felt pushed into actually accepting elective home education.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stevenson, please.
Thank you, Chair. A comment and 4 quick questions. I've raised this point before. I struggle with the suggestion of what's anecdotally, especially when we've got data before us. If we were in a court of law and I suggested to a judge the evidence was anecdotally, it would be ruled inadmissible. I think we need to look at the facts before us, and I think if the suggestion is, or the fear is, that some people are being forced to home educate, then I would suggest that would come up in the data, because anybody who works in schools will tell you that typically families who choose to leave for one reason or another don't just do it out of the blue. There's a history to it. There's complaints. There's a process you go through within school, so it doesn't come as a surprise. And those people would probably, anecdotally, if you will, put that in their reasons as well, because it's something they're quite passionate about. So perhaps we ought to be asking that question in one of the breakdowns in chart 3. And on chart 3 on page 29, I just wonder if somebody could explain, to avoid prosecution is one of the categories that we ask. Could you just elaborate on that? Is it around truancy or something? Just what prosecution would be helpful? And then short questions. In terms of pupils returning back into school who have been home educated, is there a way that we can track each cohort or each child, if you will? We've got basic numbers of how many in each cohort leave and then how many come back in another year, but we can't actually see who those pupils are. And I know you have to de-anonymise them, but my fear is that it could be, for example, that everyone who left through COVID hasn't come back. The people who've come back are the ones who left 4 years ago and the parents struggled through COVID. And how do we drill down on that data? What statutory powers do we have to make a home visit if the parent objects to a home visit? And finally, do we catch anywhere those infants who never enter the school system? We've got those who leave the school system, but what about those who never actually come into it in the first place? How do we capture that data?
I'll start answering some questions and then hand over to Barbara probably for some more detail that's around them. In terms of the prosecution, those are the reasons that parents give that might be around attendance. So that if we're going down the route of an attendance order or young people not attending school, then that could be to avoid an attendance order. So that's in terms of the prosecution. In terms of home visits, yes, parents can object to a home visit. They are required to provide a plan to the local authority so that we can determine whether education is suitable for them. If we have significant concerns, and that could be because they are not communicating with us, they're not producing plans, we can't get hold of them, the communication isn't there, then we also would check on there's various checks we would do first of all. So straight away a notification comes in to the local authority that a school tell us basically that a child is becoming elective home education. We do checks anyway where we look at our data systems to identify those young people, those families, whether there's any cause for concern around them, whether social care are aware of them, whether they are known to us in any way because of SEN or other reasons. And we would do all of those safeguarding checks initially. But a home visit, yes, they can object to actually entering the home. Then they must provide the plan. We must be satisfied with that plan, or there are various causes of action that we would take of actually going down a route of an attendance order, requiring them to submit them. But yes, we have no power to physically enter into the home. It's only where there will be safeguarding concerns, as I say, through some of the background information that we would have, or that we just are not able to communicate with them, that we would then forward that concern under the safeguarding umbrella about that particular child and young family. In terms of the children that never enter into school, this is why I think the DfE is interested in forming a register, because currently what happens is the child never goes into school. There is no requirement for them to tell the local authority that they're electively educating their child within the home environment. So they may not be on the register. They may be known to GPs, they may be known to other people within the local authority, but they don't have to physically register with the local authority that that child is being home educated. However, part of the new registration and the proposals that are around that would be that all children would be registered, and therefore all the ones that even don't attend school, never ever go into school, we would know about all of those children. Yeah, if you pick up on the CME.
Yeah, yeah, if I can just pick up on those, obviously the admissions department will know how many young people are supposed to come into school in reception. And what happens if we are not aware that that young person has registered for a school place, that will be referred to the attendance team as a CME whereabouts known. The attendance officers will go out to those addresses and say to the parents, we haven't received an application for a school place. Parents at that point can then verbally tell us that they are intending to home educate. So we do pick them up from that point. But if a family move into the city and they're already home educating, there is no compulsion on them to let us know that they are home educating. So if they're coming from another authority, the local authority there will inform us if they know that that family is moving. But otherwise we wouldn't know. I hope that gives you a bit of understanding around the checks that's happened around with attendance as well. Okay, your question around the tracking of where young people go when they leave elective home education. In terms of, we can see the numbers that have gone back into school, okay, and we can see that. What we are not yet able to do is to track what they're, progression wise, it depends when they come back into school, obviously, as well. So we do track how many go back to school. We can probably bring you the data of those by year group where they've gone back to, if that helps. So if we've got a young person, for example, that's become home educated in the last year, and then they return to school, we can provide you with when they go back into school, because we track all that. So we know when they come back. Generally, what we are seeing is young people are staying home educated for about a year at the moment, and then return to school. Some, as I say, because they're philosophical reasons for their decision to home educate, remain on our list for many years, because that's what parents want. But in principle, we would be saying that most young people tend to be home educated for around a year to 2.
Did you want to come back and do that? No, okay, thank you. Councillor Marshall-Catton, please.
Thank you, Chair. What I would like to ask, I'll make a comment. Obviously, with home education, we have also seen, whether we liked it or not, those of us with children have had to home educate our children in the last 1 year, and that was really tough. Now, I did ask this question sometimes last year in terms of the cohort that were not able to write their GCSEs and children that were home educated. So I was wondering, what's the quality of the results of those children that were home educated in terms of GCSE results? So that's the first question. Second question is, from the stats you've provided for us, we have a very high rate for BAME children who are home educated. Have we made any effort to see why there is a very high turnover for BAME children in home education?
If I answer the question about the outcomes of GCSE, parents, if they choose to put their young people in for GCSEs, do them as external candidates, and the local authority has no data from that. It doesn't come to us. So I'm afraid we have no way of knowing how many of the year 11s last year took GCSEs and what their outcomes were. So unfortunately, it's just data we can't, because if they're external candidates, we don't have the right to that data. I have to say that if you look at the data in terms of the year 11s, there were quite a lot of year 11s last year because they were home educated in year 9 and year 10, and they stayed home educated, because if you can imagine, they may have gone to become home educated in year 9 and stayed during COVID. So again, different trend than we've seen before. In terms of the BAME communities, I think this is one of the things we've looked at a lot, in terms of the fact that what we were seeing is the effect of COVID, families choosing to take their children out of school because of their concerns around the effect of COVID to multi-generational families. So we did see some ethnic groups who we would not normally see, who are home educated, who would not normally do so, choosing to do that at this time because they may have grandparents living at home, and the concern that they had around COVID. So yes, we're very aware of that concern that there has been more from BAME communities. But as what we could see, it was very much a reaction to the fact that they were living in multi-generational families, and the concern was about their young people being in school.
Julie, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Councillor. Just on that point, we do have an equality and diversity strategic board within the Children and Families Directorate, and we've got a number of improvement priorities. And one of the things, we've just agreed those improvement priorities, and we're now working them up further. But one of the things that we want to look at is disproportionality, and in particular, disproportionality for children and young people from a BAME background. One of our priorities is about education and supporting children in education. So I think this is a really important point. That figure also jumped out, a number of us, and I think it is something that we could explore in more detail through the work of the Equality and Diversity Board.
Okay, thank you. So Jackie is next, please.
I think my question is, like during COVID, like as parents, we did have to home educate, but I realized that my skills as a parent, especially for secondary education or, you know, sixth form, wasn't, you know, like I am fairly educated, but I find I'm probably out of date in a lot of things, because things have gone forward an awful lot since I've been at school, and I've been educated in a different country as well. So I think there's a few different things there. But my concern would be for the parents' actual skills. I think a lot of parents over COVID have actually realized this, that their actual skills, they can maybe educate their children up to a certain age group, but when it comes to when they're a lot older, the skills would not be there. And would that be concern for children that are older going into educate or going into home education? That would be a concern that I would have. And also, would parents be taking children out of school, especially if they're older, to care after elderly? Would it be a different objective? I know maybe I'm just, you know, I'm just putting it in there, but some children might be, especially if they're 15, 16, might be taken out of education to look after elderly or sick or people within the family, or being brought into, you know, work within, well, I suppose it's not as bad if they're working within the family, if there is a business, but at least they'd have something. But that would be my concern as well.
I think one of the key areas here is very much that parents are required to present an education plan. And I think that it is often when they are pulling that plan together that those conversations can be had about the suitability of it with parents, you know, and about the ability to deliver it. I think, as Barbara mentioned earlier, what we have seen during the COVID period is this huge amount of resource that has suddenly become online for parents and for young people to engage with. And that has been a massive, massive development. So a lot of parents are using online approaches to educate children. So some of the plans that we receive, you would absolutely see that they are using that system to ensure that the curriculum that is being taught is appropriate for their child, their age and aptitude. And we as a local authority do get to see those initial plans, and a judgment is made of whether it is appropriate. I think this comes back to the earlier point that was being made about the DFE, although lots of representations were made that's around the word suitable and what suitable means. The DFE have determined that electively home education children can be a wide range of education. It does not have to follow national curriculum. It does not have to follow any particular process or guidelines. They can determine for their own child the style of learning and the type of learning. And the DFE at this moment in time are not looking at expanding upon that definition of what suitable is. It just says very clearly in terms of age, aptitude, ability and any special educational needs. Clearly, where there is a special educational need that is identified and through an education, health and care plan, that helps us as a local authority as well, because we've already done an assessment of specific need for that young person. And then we can again engage in those conversations with parents. And it's very much about that restorative approach, working with parents, supporting parents, all in the interest of their child, and making sure that, you know, whatever decisions are made, absolutely, if it's the right decision for that family and it's a philosophical decision for that family, let's have that conversation, let's support them. If they are feeling they would like, actually, when they understand the implications around educating their child at home, if they want to move back into school, again, we would support them with a move back into school.
Yeah, go ahead, Jackie.
You've said about the education plan once a family is first notifies the council. or the DFE or whoever. But does that plan be renewed yearly when the people are gone?
Under the legislation and in Leeds, what we ask for the plan, because the plan gives us we then know whether that child is going to have a suitable education. We do in Leeds try and undertake annual visits to those who are electively home educated to check in on and make sure everything's okay. And we can say to them, would you like to give us an updated plan of what's happening? However, there's nothing, the parent can choose to do that. And sometimes that's a really good conversation. And again, particularly if we're talking about young people in year 10 and year 11, we do send information out on a fairly regular basis about careers and pathways and information. In the past, pre-COVID, we also did open events where we asked colleges and post-16 providers to come so that young people from year 10 and 11 could access some of that information that other young people would have through school. But it isn't a requirement, we ask for it. Obviously, for us, it's an assessment that has to be done on a plan that's provided on paper. Where we can, if we have any concerns, obviously we would follow that up on that and have that conversation with the parent. It tends to be, and again, this is more a national decision about how do we assess what is suitable is a very, it's not just for Leeds, all local authorities. We tend to be looking at what is the teaching around literacy and numeracy going to look like for that young person. That has to be kind of the basis where we start in terms of looking at the plans. But as Val says, families have many different ways of doing that teaching and how that comes together. Your question, the other question was about carers and whether young people become carers. And again, this is something that obviously when the young person becomes home educated, we get information from the school around the context of the child. We look at information on Mosaic. We have a triage system in that I have a social worker that works in the team who looks over all that information, and we look to see what information is coming in. And then that's always followed up with the conversation with the parent as well. So it can happen. I'm not saying it's impossible to do so, but we would be pulling on different information. But in the end, if it's a parental choice, it's difficult. Sometimes, very rarely, do we know of a young person becoming home educated who's already involved in a young carers organisation. And obviously that for us would trigger a flag. So I hope that reassures you that we try and gather information, and also what we'd like to do, obviously, is speak to the young person as well when we have those conversations with the family.
Okay, thank you. Helen is next, please.
I was just wondering, for those children or those pupils who continue to be home educated after COVID, were there any ways, so if it was to do with worries and concerns and family members who were vulnerable, did schools or the council think of ways of keeping those children on roll so that they could then sit the exams at the end of the year? Because I know, for example, my children during COVID, 2 of them at the late end of their education, and didn't suffer because they could work at their own speed. They had access to everything. So that was my first question. And the second one was around access, building on what Councillor Illingworth was saying about finance, and what Councillor Venner was saying about access to, say, cluster support that's not available for EHE children. And I think that is a massive issue going forward, the access. And, if you are home educating your children, at least one of you is not going to be working. And are there any plans or are there any campaigns around more access? I know for the curriculum, online curriculum, that's increased, which is brilliant for those children. But in terms of being able to fund the cost of exams and other things like Councillor Venner said, cluster support.
If I can respond first of all to the question about the clusters, just reminding that clusters are really school partnership clusters. So if a young person comes out of a school, then in principle, the cluster services are attached to the school. However, there are lots of services that families can still access, whether or not they're in school. So obviously MindMate and any of those services around mental health can be accessed direct. SendYas, the parent support system for parents where they've got children with potential SEN, that's still available. If we have a young person who has significant mental health issues, where they're under CAMS, we can still support them potentially through medical needs if that's going to support them back into school. So I wouldn't like you to think that there are not support systems. And in the information, the welcome pack, if you like, that we send to all parents at they're notified, we put information in there about where they can receive information. And of course, they can also always go to the local offer page, Leeds local offer, and look at the resources on there that's available for all parents and families, carers across the city. So although some of the specific things around cluster may be reduced, I would say that there's still quite a lot of services that families can access. In terms of the other question, which was about funding for exams, that is very unlikely to happen. The local authority does not receive any funding for young people once they're home educated. So there isn't a budget to provide any support for parents to access funding around exams. And that again, that's a national decision. So unfortunately, we cannot help with that. And obviously, it's one of the questions when, particularly if a parent is eligible for free school meals, their child's eligible for free school meals. It's one of the questions that and conversations we have with the families as they become home educated is, you do realise that there is no budget for resources. Unfortunately, it's not in our gift.
Okay, thank you. Kate, please.
Hi, you've answered actually quite a lot of what I was going to ask, but just a couple of questions. One was around the safeguarding. So I was just curious about what would happen where you had a young person or a child where no reason was given for the decision to home educate, but actually they weren't known to us at all, because obviously schools have eyes on children and they're quite important in terms of surveillance in relation to safeguarding. So I was just thinking, I know you mentioned about the annual visits that you can request, but what would happen in a situation where you didn't know this child at all and a home visit was refused? And also, you mentioned about quite a large proportion of young people that have maybe approximately a year off as home educated, and obviously the numbers have gone up significantly since COVID, and there will be a number of children who won't have actually gone back yet. I just wondered, we've heard a lot about catch up for everybody that was off during COVID and being home educated to a greater or lesser degree, and I just wondered about those children that may have had prolonged periods and what additional support might be offered to them, what additional resources are being given to schools to support those children in the widest possible sense, because of course school's really important as well in relation to all those added extras, all the extracurricular, the socialisation, which that some of those children may not have had the benefit of whilst being home educated. So I just wondered about that as well. Thanks.
In terms of the safeguarding, obviously the way that we work with families is a very restorative. We get the notification through, or sometimes attendant staff will say, we've met this family and this young person's never been to school. They're letting us know that they're home educating. We would try and have a visit to that family, understand their situation, understand their context. That's why I'm saying it's very individualized. And that's what we'd like to do. If the family refuses to have a visit, but they send us a plan in to say this is what we're doing, then we accept that. We will again try the following year to have that conversation with them, but we will look over the plan. If the plan isn't suitable, we will go back to them. In instances where we can't see the young person, we don't have a plan, then we use the processes under legislation and we go for a school attendance order process, because that's the process that the DFE advises to use.
Right.
So we have a very clear process with that. And the elective home education, I also manage attendance. So between the two teams, we take those, we will escalate a case. If we haven't seen the child, we have had no evidence, then we move to education supervision order process with attendance.
What if you've had a plan and you think it looks okay, but nobody's ever had eyes on that child?
It's one of those things that is very difficult, because unless we have information from other sources, but obviously we would use the usual safeguarding policy that if a young person has not been seen and we have concerns, we will ask, I mean, we do home visits, but if we cannot see the young person, we have concerns, we will raise that and can escalate it to the police and ask the police for a visit.
Yeah.
And they will then, because they are the only people who can enforce entry. And we do that from time to time, but only as a last, we follow the safeguarding policy that we have in the council, basically. And obviously we are in close touch with our social work colleagues on any young person that is flagged to us as already known to the social workers.
Yeah, I know. I'm familiar with the safeguarding procedures. I was just thinking about those rare occasions where you really don't have any information about a child, and I appreciate that you could ask for a welfare check from the police. I'm just interested. So you did say, you mentioned that does occur, but on a very rare occasion.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And in terms of additional support, this is a difficult one. We have, again, I mean, we try every year to update our web links to lots of information for young people and for their families. And we do that on a regular basis. But the additional support that comes in school for that, we don't have that. So all we can do is send information out to parents for them to access that themselves.
Once the child's returning, and then you leave it to schools.
If we've got a young person where we do some support work directly with children who who are wanting to go back to school, who aren't ready.
Yeah.
So we do some, at the moment, we've got a young person that we are supporting, doing some actual teaching with them to support them to come back into school. So there's a lot of work around transition, if and when it's appropriate.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
I think as well, Kit, once they're back into the school system, they would also have access to that catch-up funding as well, that schools would then be able to utilise for potentially tuition, one-to-one support with a, so that they get that access to those resources.
Yep, Julie.
I just wanted to come back on the question that was sort of raised around clusters, really, and just to advise that we are in the midst of an early help review. We do have our 3 early help hubs in the city. And we're really looking at part of that review around the development of community and family hubs. So again, there's some additional resource coming in by CCG to support some of this work. So again, there's something, a part of the review, and when we agree the proposed models, and we're still in a process, but part of that work will be about raising awareness of the support that is available through the early help hubs and the community and family hubs, and that support will be available for children who are electively home educated.
Thank you. Celia, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I find it intriguing that the home educated, like private education, are not held to having to follow the national curriculum, albeit, state schools are keenly inspected to make sure that they are. So bearing in mind, so these could be extremes, have you got any idea of the socio-economic profile of those? No, I didn't think you would have, well, but just thought I'd ask. And right, number 2, traveller education. I'm aware the high school I taught at a while ago, we did quite a number of traveller children, and there were then, and I think there still are, serious issues about getting certainly young boys into school. Are you aware of the numbers of this group?
Yes, there is a trend for those from the traveller popular communities to remove their children at the end of primary school, and so from year 7, we do have young people obviously from traveller communities who are in secondary school, but we tend to have around 40 to 50 young people every year who from the traveller community who are home educated, and that's the current position. So obviously, if they want to go back into school, we will help them. The same monitoring is undertaken, whatever the young person, in terms of looking at that. But yeah, again, it's something which is a national number. We always know who from the traveller community is home educated, and we've got some really good relationships with the families. And we do a lot of work also with Leeds Gate, who advocate on behalf of the traveller community as well. So yes, there are always young people who are travellers who are home educated. It's one of those things it's a trend that we've not seen any change in the 7 years that I've been lead officer. It's kind of constant, about that 40 to 50 per year.
Councillor Venner, did you want to come in?
I just wanted to add on that point. Thank you, Chair. I'm leading a piece of work at the moment on behalf of the Cabinet around gypsies and travellers, because it crosses all our portfolios. And through working with Gate, we've identified 3 top priorities. It's like a cross-directorate working group of councillors and officers. And the top 3 priorities we've identified through working with Gate are the need for more negotiated stopping sites because of the whole illegal encampment issue, the issue of mental health and suicide in the community, and the issue of children's education. Gate are really keen to kind of point out that it's not a cultural preference to not have children in school, that families that they've worked with, even who are very committed to their children being in school, very often remove them at the end of primary school because they've experienced so much racism and exclusion. So it's a really significant piece of work that needs to happen around making schools more accessible, more accepting of gypsy and traveller families, because many people in the community really want the children to go through school and find there's just too many barriers and it's too challenging. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, did you want to come back, Helen?
I just wanted to come back to my question, because I don't think I got an answer to this. I was asking other things as well, but around those year 11s who continue to home educate, and if the council and schools found clever ways to keep them on roll, so to enable them to access the exams, particularly if there were financial issues. I just wondered if there was any information on that.
I think we have to be quite clear that when a family chooses to home educate and they're removed off roll, the school no longer has funding for that young person. So they wouldn't be able to provide funding for the exams from that school because they have been literally removed off the roll.
I'm just wondering if there was any way of keeping, if the council or schools found any way of keeping them on roll. I don't know. I know, for example, my son, I had one family member who he was kept at home longer. He wasn't off roll, but he was kept at home longer because of the vulnerability of my daughter for a couple of weeks. And I just wondered, but he was still on roll, went back in. I just wondered if there were any ways that the council and schools found to sort of manage that situation to prevent more children not sitting their exams at the end of year 11, who ordinarily, if it wasn't for COVID, would have been in school. I think the difference is that for some of our young people, they remained on the roll throughout the COVID period. So they're actually still registered with the school. and for reasons of either levels of anxiety or family particular circumstances, the child hadn't specifically returned to school, and they may have been provided with work that went home, and there might have been a programme of reintegration back into school for those young people. Again, it's very individualised with particular circumstances around particular children, particular schools. But if they remained on the roll of the school, then absolutely there was a whole package put together to get them back in. For other families, they very specifically notified the local authority that we are now electively home educating. Once we get that notification, that is where then they come off the role of a school, and the responsibility then to educate goes over to the parent. So there isn't that sort of transition. And whilst absolutely we would support all families in moving back into school, if that is their choice, who have notified us, that's a different process that we would go through. I understand that that's the official, it was official.
Thank you. Councillor Lay next, please.
That one. Hello, thanks for this really interesting hour and 15 minutes for those of us who are new to Children's and Young People's Scrutiny Board, which leaves me feeling uneasy about how much we don't know about elective, if I can use that word, because I like Councillor Stevenson. I sometimes wonder that perhaps a lot of it isn't elective and it's parents whose hands are forced. I accept that there are some philosophical reasons for many patients, that's my other job, children.
Late nights.
Yeah, philosophical reasons for many parents, but I know just in my own family, my wider extended family, my sister-in-law would not have chosen to electively home educated my niece if the school had done more about the issues that my niece was suffering at school. So I just wonder, I worry about just how many people are truly electively doing it, or feeling that the system fails them. I also worry about what happens to these young people post 16. Do we know how many are NEETs and where they go post 16? I worry about off-rolling. Again, like Councillor Stevenson says, perhaps a piece of research needs to be done with where we actually try and find out how many are being off-rolled, so that we don't have to second guess or have anecdotal evidence. We can find out surely by asking the parents of those children who choose to be or who are excluded. I think Celia makes a good point. I'd also like to know about socioeconomic status. We rightly know about BAME, but we don't really know whether these children who are electively being off-rolled, electively home educated, are what their backgrounds are, other than their ethnicity, by the sounds of things. And finally, it would be, like Councillor Lamb said at the very beginning, it would be better or would be more helpful to understand these 723 children in the totality of the school system, rather than, again, just being actually told, well, it's about half of 1%. So there's still lots to be done, I think, in gathering data. I think central government has a role in that. I find it absolutely incredible that only 35 to 40% of schools submit attendance data to the DOE, and wrote here, why is that? But then you followed that up very quickly by saying, well, they don't need to tell us why. But less than half of the schools are telling the DOE, and they have no obligation to do that, there has to be something wrong with that. Either the schools are overworked or some other reason. And I guess the other thing I wanted to know, because I was new to this, is what are non-LA maintained settings? Because when I look down the list, there's lots of academies, which I know aren't LA maintained, etc. So I didn't quite understand, because there were 60 of those, and they've all been encapsulated together. So if someone could just quickly answer that. And I think Jackie also made a very good point about young carers, and I'd be worried that young carers, but just to reaffirm what Jackie said, really, that we're doing everything we can for young carers. Thank you.
Thank you. It's quite a few bits to pick up there. So
yes, and apologies if I don't get all of those, councillor, but I think there's an overview from what you are saying is about basically the duties of the local authority and around accountability that sits within that, and how much information the local authority has on this whole group of young people and the reasons that they're giving for elective home education. We do absolutely dig down into those questions that are around the choices that are made. So whilst we do get often, as Barbara said, a letter that comes in, which is a standard letter that might appear on a website that parents send into the local authority, when we engage with that family, it's one of the first questions that we ask, because the first question is around their choices, their decision making. Now, they don't have to give us a response, and that is their, you know, within the legislation, that's absolutely their entitlement not to give us a response to that question. But we absolutely do ask it. We ask it several times, and we try to have that conversation that gives them confidence that they can talk to us about the reasons that sit behind it. And also within that conversation, if they're feeling that it is actually within a particular context that they have chosen to electively home educate, and actually they might like to try another school, we will support them with that as well. So all of that work is going on, but it is very much up to that individual family who have made that decision and that choice of how much information to give us. And I think this was a big part of the consultation that was held by the DFE in 2018, because all of those questions were asked and all of that information that came from local authorities about some of the concerns that you have raised around how much a local authority has in terms of the legislation, in terms of the duties that they have. And we certainly from Leeds sent in lots and lots of information, because there were particular cohorts of children where it would be really useful if you had the legislation that gave you the powers and parents needed to give particular information and reasons, and there would be ongoing monitoring and the definition of suitable. So all of those things were raised with the DFE within that. We have got lots of data which we collect ourselves, because as I said earlier, there is no national data collection that is around this. So there is nothing national, there's no verified data, but because of the team that work on this, they absolutely, with each individual case, do pull that picture together. So we do have additional data which we could have a conversation with you around, and we could look at that, but it's difficult to do because it is often very much, if it's about decision making, again, it's very individualized, and there might be several reasons and contexts around the family rather than just being able to put it in one particular box. So all of those reasons that are given, a family within the conversation may have cited several things within it, and it's just the primary reason that would go into that picture. In terms of that overall picture, we don't have a picture of the socio-economic that is across the whole picture of all of those young people that choose. What we do have, though, because we can match the data across, is how many of that group are free school meals, because that is where then we might have a concern. So we have different ways of analysing that young person, whether they're known to social care, whether it's free school meals, particular areas of the city, which schools they've been to. So we analyse it in all of those ways. In terms of the free school meals, we currently have around 26% that are free school meals. but I couldn't give you the socio-economic picture, you know, that is broken down completely, because again, that data is protected by families. It's not a question, you know, where we can look into the family's income, but we can do it in terms of if they're eligible for free school meals. So we can do it in that way, and we do collect that particular information. In terms of the post-16, all of the young people that we know of that are being electively home educated, all of those young people there, we talk to them, they have packages of information, there are events that are held at the colleges about what courses are available to them, and we invite all of those families to that. In addition to that, we also pass on all of that information to our pathways team, who have very specific information about what is available to a young person who at post-16 is making decisions that is about their career choices. And our pathways team engage with all of those young people if the family wants to engage. But it is very much whether the family want to. So we do give them the option, we do give them the information, and we do have services that will support them with that. The off-rolling agenda, again, it comes into that individual conversation that is with the family and what they perceive to be the reason of, you know, why they feel that they can't continue to attend a school and why they might be making that decision for elective home education. What we do have is a breakdown of the children that have become electively home educated from the different schools. And it's also in terms of Ofsted, when Ofsted go into a school, the new Ofsted framework is very focused, one on children that are in alternative provision and are actually not within the school itself, but are actually receiving education elsewhere. And also that Ofsted framework does look at the number of children that have been on roll and have left the school, and then those questions are to the school and the leadership within the school about the reasons that are around the electively home educated children.
Yep. Thanks for that, Val. Couple of further points really, but they're just points. It's been really enlightening to me because I suspect I'm like most parents. I thought I had a legal requirement to send children to school. And apparently I don't. I just have the legal right to educate them, you know, and I find that absolutely amazing. So all those years I told my children they had to go to school because the law says they have to. They don't, you know. About post-16, I assume we're sending it to all the kids because I've got a year 12 now, and rightly, I was bombarded by the council on letterhead saying, Jack, what do you want to do? Jack, here's a college and here's this and here's that and all of that stuff. So if that's going out to all young people of that age, irrespective of their academic setting, whether that's home or somewhere else, then that's good because we are getting that information. And that's basically the last I want to say, really. Thanks.
Okay. Dave?
Yeah, Councillor, I was just going to mention, you just to pick up on the attendance bit, and you know, that concern around schools only inputting, you know, 35% of schools at the moment. At the moment, because of the pandemic, the DfE have asked for schools to submit data on a daily basis, and that's just been through the pandemic. Normally, attendance data would be fed through the system, through the census data, so schools wouldn't be committed to giving that data as on a permanent basis like they are now. I think schools and us had hoped that actually the DfE would go to a weekly attendance return for the schools, which would be less, because I think that's one of the problems, is that it's an additional task to do. So a weekly one would have been more manageable for schools. But I think longer term, we would expect that data collection to go once the pandemic is, once we're at the other side of the pandemic.
Okay. Yep.
Sorry, you asked a question that was also about non-maintained, because in the information, that is all the schools. So it might be nurseries, it might be private schools that are collected. So it's just an overall heading and a collection of all of the provisions that are not maintained by the local authority.
Okay, thank you. We're getting close to the end of our time on this, and I've still got quite a list of I've already come to the conclusion we're going to need another session on this, but I don't want to start debates, but if you could keep your questions and responses as speedy as possible at this stage, please. So Councillor Richards is next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, most of my questions have been raised in terms of the really valuable debate that's been happening here. Like Sandy, I feel that I have learned an awful lot, which is a bit worrying when I've been 35 years in the education business. But there we go. The point I would make is that it was raised that the increase in uptake of home learning was possibly as a result of the increase in resources that are available and the sort, the online learning which happened within the COVID periods, etc. And I think that to me was kind of reinforced when the number of 40 to 50 traveller children outside of the mainstream education was positive as a continuum, and yet the increase has happened so dramatically over this last 12-18 months. So it does kind of support the idea that those are what you might call non-traditional home learner situations in that way. You also raised the point that there is transition which supports students and parents in the idea of returning back to school for whatever reasons, whether it's school refusing for other reasons in the first place or COVID related. I wonder if you could just reinforce whether and how schools themselves are involved in those processes of transition back into mainstream in that way.
Okay. In terms of if I just let you know what's available. So for a parent, there is a live admissions line which tells you which schools have places. Okay, so if we get a request through from a parent and they say, I've got a year 8, I want to know which schools there are places at, we can signpost to that. And then obviously it's down for the parent to apply to the school. We can't do it for them, they need to do it for themselves. In terms of a young person coming back from elective home education into a school, we will provide the school with information that we've had around that young person's elective home education journey. So we will be able to tell them whether we've visited, whether we've had the plan in, that sort of information and how we've assessed it. That information goes through. The area inclusion partnerships also do support around young people returning from elective home education. So there is also that support coming in from the area inclusion partnerships, the school partnerships, those commissioned, the RIOs in there, the area inclusion partnerships have a particular responsibility to support young people coming back in. So we support young people coming back in, but to be perfectly honest, many young people in the last few years, parents have chosen to go back to school. The school then get in touch with us. We send them all the information around that support. If there are young people who need a little bit more help, as I mentioned before, I have a small team of teachers, the pupil tuition team, where we have a young person that's not quite ready for school. The parent wants them to go back. We can put some supportive assessment lessons in to help them with that process, and we negotiate that support back into school. So again, it's quite individualized. Some parents at the moment are just applying, going straight back in, and then we will hear that we get the list to say that they've applied for school. Parents don't have to let us know that they're applying for a school place, but we then get the information that they've applied. So, and then we make sure that any information goes on to the school as well. So if there's been a child protection file, and I don't mean child protection file under social care, I mean a school's child protection file. I think you'll probably understand the difference between that if you've been in education. When a young person is notified of elective home education to us, the file comes to us. And if that child then goes back into a school, the file follows that child back into the school. So we try and keep that information on the young person, the context, flowing back to the school or their next school as well.
Thank you very much. Just want to say, so presumably you are, your whole area is well aware that there will be an increased demand on those resources, because one, anticipates that maybe with this increase in number, then there will be an increase in the numbers wishing to return back into mainstream.
I think that absolutely is one of the issues that we are working with at the moment, is around that capacity to do all of the data analysis, to look at the education plans, all the safeguarding processes. And what we've had to do is realign some of our resources that we have and pull it from some of our attendance team. So over this COVID period, because a lot of children have not been in school because the school themselves have set them down, we've been able to do that. And now the situation where having those conversations, that is absolutely what you've just suggested around how do you realign the resource that we have to ensure first and foremost that children are safe, you know, and that they are then getting the education that they deserve.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to take Councillor Lennox and Renshaw, who haven't spoken yet, and then Celia and Councillor Marshall-Catung. If you could just make your points briefly, and then we'll need to wrap up the session because we've still got quite a bit to get through on the agenda. So Councillor Lennox first, please.
My question's been asked. It was about the percentage of free school meals children in that cohort of elective home educated children.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lennox. Councillor Renshaw, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like a little bit of clarity around point 29 and point 30, educational suitability. And if you could expand slightly, what are you basing it on? You're saying that they're suitable, but is that based on the level of attainment that a child was at pre-COVID, or is that on the lower levels of expectation that were brought in during the COVID or on the return to school? And what help and support is being given to the mental health of those children so that they will be encouraged to hopefully return to the school for full-time education? Thank you.
Just while you're on that was similar to one of my questions. It says there are 448 plans that have been assessed, but it says there are 907 pupils on the list, which is quite a gap. If you could help us with that.
Okay, if I answer that bit first, would that be useful? 907 is the collective number, okay? 448 of the plans that have been brought in within that year. So some of those young people from the 900 will have had plans that have been assessed in previous years. So that's why there's a difference between the two.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, in terms of considered suitable on paper, this relates back again to the conversation that we've had previously about what does suitable look like. So what we ask for parents, and they can send it in a number of different forms, they will send in what they're going to be doing with that young person. We are not, and we're not expected to, and there is no framework for us to do so, making a decision about progress of that child. So we can't do that because that's what assessment happens in schools. Local educated, electively home educated children, we don't assess their progress. So we can't assess whether their plan has made progress because that's not our job to do. So in terms of the suitable education plans, when those are presented to us, we have a trained teacher who looks over those, who is looking to see whether those plans seem to fit with the age, aptitude, and special needs, if any, of that young person. So with the experience she has, obviously we work with other teachers across Yorkshire and Humber in looking at what that might look like. So we have a view of what that might look like. You know, you're looking for literacy and numeracy support, what resources they're going to be using, what they're pulling on. Are the young person going to be seeing other young people as well, because socialization is very important as well. So that's what the teacher is looking at. If she has a plan where she doesn't feel there is evidence that that is suitable, then we escalated that. We asked for more information from the parent initially, but if that's not forthcoming, That's where we use the school attendance order process, because we are not satisfied that the plan is showing suitability for that child's education. In terms of the mental health, again, in the information that we send out in the welcome pack and in the information that we send out, we always refer to the MindMate support. The MindMate support team, the new teams that have come into Leeds, have been working directly with us. And so parents can refer directly into MindMate and get that support around mental health support as any young person can in the city.
Okay, thank you for that. So Celia, you wanted to come back in quickly, and then
Yeah,
Councillor
just
Marshall.
quickly. I'm very aware that the powers of local authorities have been taken into more central control by the state, which has left local authorities with far fewer responsibilities and powers. And I'm just wondering, being aware of other local authorities that don't seem to cover the areas that we seem to cover, how much of what you do is above and beyond what you are required to do? And if you can't answer this now, can you let us know?
Yeah, we do. We are very, very diligent in terms of the safeguarding aspect within the local authority, because that's absolutely the key. And safeguarding both in terms of the well-being of a young person, whether they have mental health as well, but also in terms of their education opportunities. So we do absolutely ensure that we do follow through on the education plans. And if we are not satisfied, we do put orders in place. A lot of authorities are not perhaps as robust as we are in following those processes. What we have also done this time, despite the lack of capacity, is because over the COVID period, a lot of the plans had to be judged because they were sending them into the local authority, or we had to do online viewing of talking to parents, through Zoom, etc. What we have done this term, again, is move resources into catch up, and have done a whole programme of work where all of those families, young people, been contacted again, where we actually stood in the gardens or knocked on doors and made visits to make sure that they are safe. So we do go above and beyond those expectations. There are very clear guidelines, though, within the legislation of points you can't go beyond. And that's again some of the consultation that was held, where we were saying as a local authority, we really feel that it should be mandatory, to be registered, on a list, and that it should be mandatory that the information, if it's going to be on a yearly basis of what comes in. But the DfE have been very clear that elective home education is a parental choice, and absolutely the right of the parents to choose that, and that we should use the safeguarding powers that we have as a local authority where we have overall concerns about the well-being of a young person. And we do use those powers, and we do work very closely with social care that's around that identification when a notification comes in, and where we have concerns, that is passed on immediately onto social care. So we do go above and beyond.
Yeah. Have we seen the submission that was made to the DfE on this? And if we haven't, are we able to?
I don't believe we have, but I don't see any reason why we couldn't.
I mean, the submission, because we spoke to, I think it was 2018, so it would have been Steve Walker, who's the director, that signed it up at that point. Whether it is still within the files on it, I'm not sure. But it came into the local authority. We could check whether that is still within our files. But it went out to all local authorities. It was a survey, it was an online survey that we then had to send back. So whether we would still have a record of that, I am not sure, but we could certainly check.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Councillor Marshall-Catton, please.
Thank you, Chair. Val, I believe you answered some of the questions, but specifically on elective education. I was contacted, my kids were contacted couple of months ago to say they didn't know their destinations. And that was comforting for me as a mother, knowing, and you needed to know exactly where. Those letters that were sent to them, do you send the same letters as well to children in elective education post 16? Are they sent those letters as well?
Is it a destination? It would be the pathways team that information would go to the pathways team if they are post 16, if they're elective home education, and the pathway team then contact them and send the letter that goes through. So that goes to all of the children that are on our list of elective home education.
And just to say, for those children where we're not sure or they're unknown, the pathway team will go out and visit and will door knock. And again, just do everything in our power to locate children and to ensure that we do know what the destination is and that we can support them on the journey.
Okay, go on, Kate. Express point, please.
Sorry, Chair, just really quickly. Just a couple of things.
You get one.
Yeah, okay. You were saying earlier about parents don't have to tell you if their children go back into school, and that quite often you don't get a reason given for why they've chosen to home educate. When they're going back in, do you analyse the reasons that they give at that stage? Because I'm conscious that sometimes the decision to home educate is really emotive and they might not want to give you a reason at some. So if you subsequently then find out at a later date what the reason is, does that go into your data as well and inform?
If we get that information back, yes, obviously we would update.
Okay, so it does
update
inform
that child's
your
record, and it would then update on the system.
And if the reason is mental health, if they've got anxiety or other mental health issues that might be related to COVID or otherwise something that's happened at school, I mean, you say that obviously they get that mental health support, but I'm aware that the waiting lists are huge. So for MindMate, for the first stage of help, which is psychological wellbeing, before you even get to CAMS, it's months and months and months, and all the time that child's not being educated. So to what extent are those children then prioritised by those services where they're not in school and they want to be but can't be because of the mental health issues that are the barrier to them being there?
So waiting lists, absolutely a real problem. And one of the encouragements really about returning into school is because the wellbeing returned to school, and the government gave grants to local authorities to provide information that was online, but also back into schools to support schools in those young people who were having mental health issues. And I think that that is one of the areas that absolutely has come to light in terms of those that are electively home educated. So whilst there are support that might be through the channels of a GP, etc., and whilst you might have stuff that's online, and obviously the GP would refer and you'd go on the waiting list as all the other children, we are very conscious that there is a wealth of information that is within schools and readily available, and all of those staff trained. So the educational psychologists have been working with all our schools that are across the local authority, ensuring that there's a programme in place and that they can access a programme. The ed psychs are attached to every individual school where they go in and they're having that conversation. They've done planning visits at the beginning of this year, but it is that group of children where it has been elected that they're not part of that system, of that process. And again, it's through the GP, it's through those services.
Julie?
Briefly, I suppose just to return to the comments that I made earlier about the early help review and the fact that we're focusing on our early help hubs and our community and family hubs. The other strand is on our therapeutic support services. So really recognising, you know, there's something about direct delivery. Again, there is some additional funding coming in through the CCG, but equally there's something about upskilling the workforce, you know, right across the city, and also within our early help, you know. So again, we've got a real focus on how we can ensure that we get that spread, that offer of therapeutic support to children across the city, and how we have a skilled and knowledgeable workforce and partnership that can do that at the earliest opportunity.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Councillor Venner, any final points you wanted to make?
No, I'm fine. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Okay, right. Well, that's been a fascinating session. I think probably many of us have learned a lot in that time, some of which is reassuring and some concerning. And a bit like Councillor Lay, sort of my conclusion is there's probably too much that we don't know on this agenda. And I fully accept that's not necessarily the responsibility. I'm very, very grateful for all of the information you've shared with us. I do feel we're going to need another session on this. The sort of questions I've been jotting down as we're going along, and there's certainly not for now, but things that we could do with is finding a way to look at data on outcomes and destinations, because the challenge is we don't know to what extent this is a good solution for children and young people and to what extent it isn't. And we need to try and get a handle on that. I suppose there's the question of how many of these children and young people as a council are we concerned about, and how many are we not concerned about? We've kind of touched on how many have submitted the plans, but I'd like to get into a little bit more information about that, what the quality is and what happens if we don't think the provision is suitable, what happens next. It'd be really useful to find out how many children in the city we don't know about that aren't in a category, and if we can unpick that data. So we know how many are on school rolls, we know how many are electively home educated, whether that's for good reasons or not. I'm assuming there's a number of children that are still not on a list that we don't know about, and that would be useful to have information about. I'd like to know a bit more about how we're doing on the annual visits for those children that are staying for some time, and what sort of information and feedback we're getting on that. It would be really useful. You've indicated that this is a national trend and a national problem. It'd be useful to see some data on that, so we can compare ourselves with statistical neighbours and core cities, so that we can satisfy ourselves that either we're doing very well on this or we're lagging behind others. But we could do some data on that. From the chart on page 34 about the breakdown on schools, coming back to sort of socioeconomic data and things like that, be useful to know where the children live, because that, especially at secondary, often bears no relation to where they go to school, and it sort of be useful to have a ward breakdown, I think, of to see if we can find some patterns of how this has affected. And then also it'd be useful in a future session to explore exactly what happens when we do have safeguarding concerns, or we do have concerns. What happens then, and what powers do we or other agencies have to do something? So that there's quite a lot, and I'm sure there's other things, and if others have got thoughts, then by all means feed them in, because we hadn't originally planned to have another session, but I feel there's still a lot more to go at here on this before we make any recommendations around this. So with that, a little later than planned, I suggest we wrap up on this, take a quick 5-minute comfort break, and then hopefully not, if we can make it closer to 5 minutes than 10, be ready to go as close to 5:02 as possible. If I could just make sure, ask everyone to check their microphones are off. The slide will go up on the screen to say we're on a break. There is still tea and coffee available in the members' room. Hopefully we can be ready to go again in 5 minutes, please. But thank you for that, everyone. Okay, everybody, if we could take our seats and get ready to go again, please. Have you brought a note? Okay, so I think the webcast is back on. So we're moving on to item 8. Now, I'm anticipating this is going to be a very brief item because when we first looked to put this on the work schedule, there was a lot more concern about guidance for GCSE and A-level exams for the summer. I think unless anybody raised anything alarming today, that has dissipated somewhat. But if I can ask Councillor Venner or Julie if they want to make any introductory comments.
I don't, thank you. I don't know if Dave may want to.
Okay, Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Lamb. Yeah, I think you're right there, actually, in terms of, I think when we spoke about this last time, they were in the middle of the consultations that were going on in terms of what's going to be happening over for exams in 22. So the purpose of this paper for scrutiny was really to provide an overview for your awareness and information in terms of ways forward as to whether you wanted to look at a working group. So we presented the paper in three ways, really. What are the change? What grades are going to look like in 22? What changes have been made to exams in 22? And what will Plan B look like if exams can't go ahead next year? So just taking those three sections, the grades results have been higher in 2020 and 21 than in 2019. That's due to the assessment systems, different, teacher assessment, centre assessed grades, what people often would refer in the media as grade inflation. So the rationale behind the new guidance is that it would be unfair to go back to 2019 results to benchmark next year's exams, because the class of 22 and 23 have been the most impacted through the pandemic. So the DfE have announced a midway point where they're going to benchmark against between 2021 results and 2019 results. And I think this appears the fairest system, and spoken with secondary colleagues, and there hasn't been any negative comeback from schools that we're aware of in terms of that system, that rationale behind having that midway point. There's been a significant amount of changes announced. So since the last scrutiny meeting, the outcome of the consultation has been published. For example, changes such as optional topics in English literature, history, geography. There'll be more choice on some exam in some exam areas. In science, for example, teachers can carry out the experiments while students observe rather than having to do them practically. Formula tables and sheets in maths and science will be provided, and so on. But I think the most significant change that scrutiny need to be aware of is that the DfE plans to tell schools from the 7th of February what topic areas will be the focus. And I guess the reason for not doing that now is that narrowing the curriculum could potentially start now. So I think that's why they're leaving it till February. And then schools can then move into a much more focused curriculum on what they'll be assessed on. This approach has actually been advocated by some of the head teacher unions. And again, I've spoken to secondary colleagues from feedback from schools, and there's been no backlash against this that we're aware of. The points to cover in the plan was the contingency plan. And if members recall, last year there was very little information provided about Plan B in the event of exams not taking place. So I guess we welcome the clarity and the timeliness that's been proposed this year from DfE, and actually, indeed, there is a Plan B just in case. So the consultation proposes that if exams can't take place, a similar teacher assessment system to the one used last year will operate. And the DfE have given schools further guidance and clarity about how they would do those assessments and what evidence they're going to need. So I think one of the suggestions would be that schools and the academies should be assessing children on a termly basis, and where possible under test conditions. and that schools should use all the assessments that they have rather than just cherry picking the best, the ones where the highest results. Haven't had any complaints or issues highlighted from schools about the guidance on this. So I know that members considered the working group, but it may be that at this point, Councillor Lamb, that you want to consider how you having this sort of topic as a bit of a watching brief. And I think with more guidance being published much earlier this year already, and I think there was also the issues last year with Leeds young people have been considerably impacted by higher rates of absence from school as well. Whereas I think with the new guidance in terms of COVID bubbles, et cetera, there's less, that's not impacting as much. But I guess if rates continue to go up and absences go up from staff and pupils, and that's maybe something that the scrutiny will want to look at again if there's a disproportion within Leeds. So really that's just an overview of the paper, just for sort of like whether, you know, for consideration and where you want to go with that now.
Okay, thank you, Dave. That's really helpful. I think certainly a lot of the concerns that we had when this was first raised have kind of been addressed. So I'm not minded, unless there's a clamour around the room, that we would have a working group now. And as you suggest, a watching brief, I think we can always revisit it if any concerns are coming up down the line. Councillor Renshaw, you wanted to make a point.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask the question about, in the summer, it was the assessments that were carried out. Any child who didn't quite reach the level that they wanted to and has done a resit is actually doing the exam this month. So I just wondered if you could clarify why that, and then reading through this, it's going to be based on assessments again, or part assessment.
Yeah, I think the resits there are to give those students the opportunity to have some additional coaching and some additional tutoring for them to resit the exam again to see if they can improve their grade. But that's the specific case rather than it being for a full new cohort going through the system this year.
Yeah, but does that make it equal on the outcomes of those exams, considering that no other children in their year group will have taken the exams to the extent that they are? And alongside that, they're obviously studying for higher levels of education. So they've still got the same pressures, but alongside that, they've got exams to take rather than assessments.
Yeah, I think if I sort of, I'll talk with secondary colleagues about that one and come back to you on that, because a lot of that will be with the schools will be working with the young people in terms of how they manage that and how they manage the expectations of doing their current study and the things that they've got to do. But it's, like I say, it's an additional opportunity. Rather, they wouldn't be going through the whole assessment. They wouldn't have the time to do the whole assessment process as the current year going through would be, because it's an additional opportunity, so that there's not time for them to do all those assessments through with the teacher assessed grade. So I can get some more information on that for you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm not seeing any other hands. Is everyone content that we just keep this under a watching brief going forward? Councillor Marshall-Catton.
Thank you, Chair. Dave, what I would like to ask is from an example from an A-level results case that I have been dealing with. And we do remember when the assessment came, teacher assessment grades, and we had an A-level student with all the algorithm, and she was from an LS7 postcode, which is one of the deprived areas that we have in Leeds. And she had 3 A's and believed she was an A-star student and brought all her paperwork to myself. I took all that paperwork for all her grades and I attended the college. I wouldn't want to say the name here. And when we went through her paperwork with all her grading, they changed one of her grades from A to A-star. And I think she already had an A-star in another one, but what she wanted to study was medicine. And for Cambridge, they needed 3 A-star. Now, the subject in which she was given an A, she believed that was her strongest subject, and the student believed she was an A-star student and highest in her class. I challenged the college, wrote to them, and I've had several meetings with them. She was ranked 4th highest in chemistry in that college. I asked the college how many people were given A stars, and they said 12. So I said to them, and she was a Black girl, I said to them, if 12 people were given A star and you have ranked her 4th, how come she was not given an A star? Until today, I haven't received the answer. And I was told to appeal to Ofqual. I did all of that, and we're still nowhere. So what I am saying here is, when exams are not written, it's very, very difficult for young people, especially those who really know what they do. And I mean, this young girl was so certain. There was no subject, no exam she wrote that was below 89%. And she had all her papers. And because she brought that to me, I knew it was worth fighting for. And I went through all of that. She missed a whole year and has finally gotten medicine in Sheffield, but it's not the university she wanted because she needed 3 A stars and she was given 2 A stars and an A. So we need to have and put something in place. If 2022 comes and children are not able to write exams, we're going to be having this same problem where certain children will be on the receiving end and not given what they actually deserve. And if we actually challenge it and they are still not given what they deserve, what do we do?
Yeah, I think there's been some really unfortunate sort of incidents in terms of the assessment over the last couple of years, and you know, hopefully, you know, the Ofqual will come back to you and respond to you in terms of that appeal. I'd like to think that this year, and this is why I think it's good that the government have published guidance and information for schools much earlier, so they can start preparing just in case there is that situation. We certainly don't want a situation where COVID is impacting on children not being able to sit exams over the next couple of years, but actually schools are able now and to be building that evidence base to get really much more accurate results for those young people. So I think we're in a better position. And the other thing is schools have become very sort of good, effective at doing sort of much more teacher assessed grades because they've got into that system. So hopefully those situations won't crop up again because they're doing much more of the assessments ongoing now and building that evidence base.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so I think that the conclusion of this item is that we're going to keep a watching brief on this and we'll come back to it if necessary. Councillor Stevens.
Just one quick point on that. I think it'd be quite useful for us to know the number across the city that did resit or have resat an exam if possible. Because to Councillor Marshall's point, the ultimate for her student would have been she'd have had the opportunity to sit the exam if she thought that she could have sat and got the grade. And so I suppose we'd need to know why not, but also across the city to broaden it out, how many didn't. Because one of the factors nobody ever discusses in grade inflation is that kids fail exams or don't do as well in exams under pressure. And so when you don't let them sit exams and you predict, you end up with higher grades than kids would have got if they'd just been off on the day. So it'd be useful for us to know how many did do a resit and if you can, whether that altered the grade. That'd be quite useful for us.
Yeah, if you could get that for us, Dave, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to item 9, which is the new revised SEND and inclusion strategy. And I believe Val is going to be leading on this. The original plan was to finish at 12:30. I think that's nigh on impossible with the agenda, but if we could try, and the next 2 items are sort of about 15 minutes on each. So if we take it that everybody's read the papers and keep the introduction brief, and then we'll get through as many questions and comments as we can, please.
Thank you, Councillor Lamb. So we are bringing the strategy for discussion and to share with you. It is a draft strategy, Send and Inclusion Strategy. Since 2014, the Children and Families Act, all local authorities have been required to produce a SEND strategy. So this is a refresh and a revamp really of the old strategy that we had from before 2014. So it's really to share with you and to ask for your comments before we move the draft strategy, actually finalising it for the local authority. The Send Inclusion Strategy aligns with the 3A strategy that I know Dave is going to talk to in a little while about improving attendance, attainment and achievement for all children and young people in the city. The Send and Inclusion Strategy identifies that for young people with special educational needs and those in vulnerable contexts, we also need to do additional work to ensure that they are successful and that we do improve their outcomes. So that's what this strategy focuses on. The draft strategy is being informed by our CQC SEND Ofsted inspection that we had in 2016. It's been informed by the voices of parents, carers and young people through ballots, through consultations and also through partners working in health and social care and education. Of course, a lot of those over the last 2 years because of COVID have had to be held virtually rather than the planned face-to-face forums that we had hoped to have. However, it is a co-constructed strategy between all of those partners across health, social care and education, and is based upon what all of those partners, what families feel we need to be doing as a city in order to improve our outcomes for children with SEND and those in vulnerable contexts. So the draft strategy was sent out to various groups. We had a 7-week consultation period that was in June where we made the strategy accessible to all. It was on the local offer. We went round to families of school, cluster groups, head teacher forums. We held virtual meetings online with parents, with carers. We went to the youth Parliament and spoke to a lot of young people as well about what their perspective was and what they felt need to be included within the strategy. So a lot of it was held within the terms of, you said, we did, have we got it right? Have we actually captured everything that you have told us that we need to work on? Over 30,000 people accessed the strategy and took information from that strategy, with 3,000 of those actively becoming engaged in the information, and then about 500 to 600 attending very specific meetings and giving us feedback. The responses confirmed the proposals and the prioritised within the strategy. However, there was a concern generally that was around the challenging context that we are currently working in coming out of COVID, and also the lack of resources and the capacity that we would have to be able to deliver on that strategy. The appendix in the pack outlines the strategy, so hopefully you will have all had a chance to have a look at that. Identify the key shared values. Those key shared values are of inclusion, individualisation and integrated services and practices, and that's the overarching umbrella. And then we have 6 priorities that have been identified that we will have working groups that sit underneath those and a reporting system that goes through to the partnership board and a practice improvement group. Those 6 priorities are around the early identification of need, workforce development, development of quality plans and support for those in vulnerable contexts, continuum of provision and working together, integrated working, shared pathways across all services. Those 6 priorities, as you would imagine, overlap and are interlinked in terms of action plans that then would sit underneath them. In each one of the priority areas, work that responds to the impact of COVID will be in phase 1, and that clearly is the priority. So looking at each one of those priorities, all of the things that relate to COVID and the recovery plan that sits around COVID, they're all within the plans and the action plans for phase 1, alongside other cross-cutting themes of working with families and hearing their voice continually and improving that communication with families, personalisation around individual needs, individual young people, joint commissioning, and we're doing a lot of work on joint commissioning with health colleagues, using data to plan the right service and to target those resources, and obviously working across the whole age range from early years and into adulthood, and a real focus then of moving into post-16. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Val. Right, any questions or comments? Celia?
Thank you, Chair. Just reading the body of the report, I guess most people on this board are aware that historically our SEND was underfunded, and then when it was supposedly rectified, it was capped, which seems quite contradictory, if not perverse. But you make the point in paragraph 20 about employment for SEND. Now, that means additional funding. I know the high needs block is it permanently in debt or whatever, but the funding to support SEND young people in employment, I would imagine, is pressurized, and it's of concern that so few go on to employment. I also wondered how much of the council's apprenticeship scheme, that I know they're involved with apprenticeship, how many of those would be suitable and even are earmarked for SEND young people. And of course, and it's been a perennial, eternal maybe, problem, transport and the ability of young people, SEND young people to be able to travel independently. So can you elaborate on those concerns, please? Oh, sorry.
Absolutely. I mean, funding clearly is a concern, and absolutely correct in terms of the high needs block, the DSG budget that comes into the local authority, and that high needs block has been overspent for some time. In terms of the capping, absolutely. We were capped, I think, from 2014, 16. Tim sat next to me, so he knows way more than I do, but over 20 million in terms of capping within the high needs block. And it is those services that come into the local authority. So it's that money that actually provides for all of that provision in terms of building special schools, places that we have as well for young people. So that is the overall picture. And I know that Tim is wanting to come in specifically to talk about that capping, because we're currently in process of having to write a plan, which is about a plan of how we are going to reduce that deficit that is within the high needs block, which is what all local authorities are being asked to do. So yes, there is an issue in terms of the funding overall that comes into the high needs block and our ability to spend within that. In terms of your other question about the post-16 agenda, yes, we are developing very specifically, that's linked into all of this strategy of the post-16 picture that's across the city. I'm working with partners within colleges. Just had a meeting yesterday with Leeds City College about expanding their programme for all of our learners and those with special educational needs, and also conversations that are having with partners about supported internships for those that can't go on to a full apprenticeship course, but actually could undertake a course that was supported alongside the teaching and is very tailored to those particular needs.
Tim?
Thank you. The national funding formula was implemented in 2018, and there was a phased introduction of it. Since 2018-19 to date, across the whole of the DSG, we've lost £30 million of funding to the cap. £20 million of that 30 was the high needs block. As the years have progressed with the introduction of the national funding formula, the amount that we've been capped has reduced. However, we will still be capped on the high needs block next year by just short of £2 million. But that's the smallest amount of cap we've received. The requirement is to balance the DSG in totality. So historically, we've overspent on the high needs block and underspent on other blocks, small underspends on the schools block, bigger overspends on the early years block, and the CSSB block is so small that it doesn't really factor into it. So although we are required to bring that DSG back into balance, the key area where we will need to look to bring it back into balance is the high needs block. Had it not been for the cap, we wouldn't have been overspent. And I think we've done a pretty good job of maintaining the overall deficit at a far less figure than the overall amount that we've lost to the cap on gains that's been implemented since 2018-19.
Thank you. Councillor Lay, please.
Couple of quick questions. How many is in the team that deliver this strategy? And if money was no object, how many would you need in the team? And when you say it's capped, Tim, I assume you mean it's capped by central government, but is there, excuse my ignorance again, but could I take £2 million out of somebody else's budget somewhere else and put it into there? Is it about choices, or can't you do that? So that's a constructive question, not a.
So as government moved to a hard implementation of the national funding formula, there are winners and losers because the amount in the whole system is controlled. So effectively, we've lost money to the cap such that other local authorities don't have to lose as much in the move towards the national funding formula. Can we take money from elsewhere? We can, and we already do. So one of the things that we can do is transfer funding between the schools block and the high needs block. And every year for probably at least the last 5 years, we have moved money from the schools block to the high needs block. We can only move 0.5% of the schools block. And we can only do that with the express agreement of the schools forum. So it's not a decision that the council can take. So what we've done every year is we've consulted with schools across the city. And because this affects all schools, we consult with maintained schools, just like we consult with academies. The results of that consultation come back to schools forum, and it is schools forum that then take the decision as to whether or not we can transfer money between the schools block and the high needs block. If schools forum disagree, we do have dispensation to get approval to do so from the Secretary of State. There is a whole raft of measures that we need to put in place to be able to demonstrate how and why we're doing that. And that is something that we've done each and every year for the last 5 years.
Are you happy with that? I think there was another part to your question, wasn't there?
Yeah. Do you want me to come in on the other part of the question in terms of the team that can deliver the strategy? It is a cross-cutting strategy. It does involve colleagues that are from health and from social care. And we have pulled together those different agencies in representation so that it is a shared delivery, because we're talking about shared pathways as well. But you're absolutely right. The capacity, if I'm talking about the SEND inclusion teams, we struggle with some of the capacity because, of course, all of our teams have got statutory functions and statutory duties, as well as then delivering on a strategy. One of the things that we are working on is actually about developing the capacity within schools as well. So part of the picture is using the resource that we have and the wealth of resource and the skill and the expertise in schools and with our SENCOs. So we have developed as part of this strategy what we are calling the SEN practice framework, which is actually to build that expertise, that knowledge with the online resource, with training, with support, so that we are giving away some of those skills. That's certainly the way forward in terms of that early help, early identification of need, ensuring that we've got the right support, the right time, the right conversations at the right time to be had. But yes, the team has got statutory functions, so we're having to pull away from some of the work that we are doing, basically to ensure the early help agenda, which I think everybody can agree that's the way we need to go in terms of prevention, so that we don't have needs escalating throughout the city, ending up in the need for an education, health and care plan, and without resolving those issues at an earlier stage. So yes, and I know that we've had a conversation previously about the number of staff. I would be delighted if we could double my number of staff, and we may just about cover then all of the areas that we need to cover. But I know that that is not reasonable within the current context that we are within as a local authority. So we are having to think of ways, creative ways of developing the capacity, pulling resources across, and within the Children and Families Directorate, these are the conversations we are having about how we prioritise and share those resources.
You wanted to come back, Councillor?
Yeah, just very quickly. I wasn't going to say I'd met with you recently, but I was going to say I'd had a SEND meeting recently where I'd been told you'd got a team of 37 and you could do with twice that. So, and that each one of those team carried a caseload of roughly 300. How the hell can anybody manage a caseload of 300? You know?
That's absolutely correct. In terms of SENSAP, that I've got the responsibility for the statutory functions of education, health and care plans. That's absolutely correct. It's 300 cases that they are holding. We also have other teams that are working again, some of them funded through the DSG budget, the EPs, the Senate teams as well, that work with schools, with SENCOs in a very collaborative way of ensuring that they're putting the support in schools again to try and prevent that escalation that is going through. But the number of requests for education, health and care plans, we are now over 5,000, where we have got 5,000 plans in the local authorities. And we are seeing that rise steadily. We are predicting a rise of around 7,000 by 2025, which all have to be maintained. So it isn't just the writing of the initial plan, it's every single year. The statutory, the legislation is around also reviewing all of those plans.
Okay, thank you. Helen, next, please.
First, just to acknowledge all your hard work and also the hard work that goes on in our schools from the SENCOs who work really hard. But I just wanted to point out, obviously early identification is really important of needs, but there's a real conflict between what Ofsted wants and what schools can do for their children who have difficulties, because I know from speaking to a couple of really experienced SENCOs over the last, say, 18 months or so, that there's that the head teachers are under so much pressure to get as many children as possible up to the expected level. And those children who they know haven't got a cat's chance in hell of getting to that expected level, although they can make good progress given the investment, their children are being pushed by some head teachers through the different levels towards an educational health care plan, so that they are not counted in their figures, and so some of them are trying to get them into other settings. And this, I don't want to sort of criticise these head teachers because they're under so much pressure, but we've got SENCOs saying, I know that with the right time and effort, these children can catch up, the gap can be closed with the right emotional support, the right educational support, but the number of days that SENCOs are being given to actually work as a SENCO is being reduced in quite a few schools, and I just think it's a huge problem that, you know, and growing problem, and it's not good for those individual children.
Yeah, absolutely acknowledge, and just want to shout out for all of the Senkos, because I think they're absolutely fantastic, and the work that they do in every school. We do have support networks for all of our Senkos, so they meet on a regular basis where we can support them with their particular issues in individual schools, and they're very, very well attended. And our teams are always going into the schools to try and see what they can do support, but they are limited as well. But yes, in terms of this competing agenda, in terms of the overall attainment levels and those with special educational needs, that is something that is really highlighted. And I think it's one of the things that certainly Ofsted now, when they're going into schools, are very keen on identifying the overall cohort of the school, the level of progress that young people are making for their particular needs, as well as the overarching attainment level. But I completely acknowledge that for schools, it is a competing agenda, and some children end up with education, health and care plans, and parents, again, it's their preference as well to go into special education rather than staying within the mainstream, which is part of the story. When we went out to the consultation, a lot of parents were telling us their particular stories about their young person and their feeling around that. Equally, we've got fantastic examples of, you know, the lengths that some of our schools go to actually to maintain and to support young people's special educational needs. So, you know, again, a shout out for schools, because they're working within that climate and all of those pressures.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stevenson, please.
Val, earlier you mentioned internships. Can you confirm that they'll be paid internships?
The way that it's funded would be through our FFI system. It's our funding system. So if they've got an education, health and care plan, it's looking at their plan of what their needs are and what the programme is. And then the funding comes through the FFI system of funding about what it is their particular needs are.
But the individual themselves will be in receipt of minimum wage.
If they're working as an apprentice, then that would be part of that conversation. I'm talking about actually paying for the course would come from the local authority, and then it is the employers then where we have that conversation about whether they're being paid for the work that they're undertaking.
Yeah, that's the bit between, because you mentioned that if they're not on an apprenticeship, they can do an internship. I'd be very concerned if, as a local authority, we were setting something up for somebody to go and do an internship for a period of time and not putting in the caveat that that should be paid employment.
A lot of our internships go with a proviso, because they're studying at the same time as they're getting the experience up through the internship, and then they do end up with a job. So it is successful actually in getting young people that are not becoming neat and actually moving into employment. So we do find that, and we have those conversations with employers. So it is a package of support that goes in. But I do take your point that if they're doing meaningful work that actually should be paid, then it should be paid for. And that is the conversation with the people that are undertaking the internships.
Yeah, I would think that everybody here would want to make sure that was a definite, and we weren't making people work for nothing with an incentive to get a job at the end of it.
I think that's noted. Okay, so our recommendation is around whether we have any comments or changes we want to make to the strategy, or if we're happy to endorse and support it going forward. Councillor Gruen.
Yeah, it's not a change to the strategy, but I think given the nature of the debate, I totally agree with everything that colleagues have said, and what potential and actual barriers there are in getting in the way of actually meeting the needs of these young people with special educational needs. But I think we equally ought to just acknowledge that it's a very good strategy. And I would like to re-emphasise the importance of identifying those needs early. For me, that's the most important part of this strategy. And I just wonder if it should be highlighted even more than it is. I mean, it's all important, but I think getting to early identification is what you hear mostly from parents, and that's really important. But we haven't actually said what we think about the strategy, and I think it's a very good strategy. I think implementing it will be a very different story for all the reasons that we've just rehearsed now. And I presume, Chair, that we will be monitoring some of its implementation. And I think we perhaps, given what's been said, we need a little bit of insight into some of the cases and how they are progressing under this strategy, either as they should or not. I think as councillors, we often get cases to do with parents coming about children with special educational needs because they're not progressing. And maybe that gives us a warped view of what the rest of them are doing. You might say to me, well, Caroline, for everyone that you comes to your notice, there are 100 that go through with really positive results. But I think we need a better sort of indication of that. But I do think it's a very good strategy. I just wish we had more resource to implement it.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Gruen. Yeah, I think, again, it's something we'll need to have back to us perhaps in 12 months' time to look at how we're doing and how progress is going against the plan. Yeah, I don't see anyone else with comments. So I think on that basis, we can take the board well, I think we probably agree with Councillor Gruen's comments that it's a good plan. It seems to be in the right direction. And now it's just trying to make sure it gets delivered and implemented. So, okay, right. Thank you very much. So now on to the next plan, which is the refreshed 3A's plan. So again, I don't know if Councillor Venner or Julie have got any opening remarks before Dave takes us through. No, Dave, over to you.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'll try and talk quickly because I know that
we'll assume everyone's ready.
Time is tight, and I think the plan itself is actually, we've tried to set it out and structure it that it's a relatively self-explanatory plan. But so I'll try and shorten my overview. Members will be familiar with the most current 3 years plan, which was scheduled to last until 23. But there's been a catalyst for this refresh. One, the most significant has been the COVID pandemic, and this has understandably changed our priorities as a council, and has highlighted the need to respond to some emerging priorities and needs that we've talked about at Scrutiny over the last couple of years. So we've utilised the last annual standards report that we produced for Scrutiny, which is the new format has given us a much clearer focus on the priorities that the city has and the actions that we need to take. And I think we've also, during pandemic, we've worked closely with schools and academies, further developing positive relationships across the city. I think we want to take account of the views and the priorities that schools are facing and academies are facing, which potentially weren't as prevalent in the last sort of iteration of the 3 years. So I think it's worth just saying about the 3 years refresh, that it isn't a plan for schools, but it's developed really to get a focus from the directorate into supporting schools and settings to enable them to improve outcomes for young people. And I think it's very clearly been influenced by our stakeholders and through our big learning conversations that we held in the summer with a range of different partners. And it's also worth just pointing out to Scrutiny that this isn't the 3 years refresh isn't all the work that's going on from the Children and Families Directorate in terms of supporting schools settings. Whilst the focus within the refresh is on specific priorities, there's still a lot going on. But this does ensure, I think, what we want to make sure with limited resource, we want to ensure that we focus our precious resources and time on the real key priorities that we think that will make the most significant differences to our young people across the city. So the priorities, I won't go through them because I'm conscious of time, but we've identified through our conversations, through our data, through as reading as a priority, attendance, SEND issues, which links to what Val has just been talking about in terms of the SEND strategy. One of the key ones that comes specifically from the COVID pandemic is the well-being of staff and children in schools and academies. And the fifth priority that's identified is about transition and each stage to learning being effective. I think in the last one we had just the early years start, but that's still a key part of it, but it's actually widening that transition. So just to outline a little bit, Councillor Lamb, about how we've structured the document and how that makes it so that everybody within the directorate is very clear that this is manageable and the expectations on each of the teams. So each of the priorities for each of the priorities is a service lead who's identified, and you'll notice in the plan, one really key priority. So for example, in the reading one, that's underneath my sort of service area. One of the key priorities is about offering deep dives into our schools and settings and academies on a trade basis, so that actually we can get some really key data in terms of what's going on in reading and in the school. In addition to that, the main service lead has also identified 3 additional actions that will be taken to support the priority. And then you'll notice that further actions for that priority are identified. So for example, if it's my service that's the key one, Val's will have, the inclusion team will have one in there. Plus also there's some very specific priorities and actions for other areas of our directorate. So for example, in the reading, you'll notice that there's an expectation that social care will get involved in getting key messages out to parents on how to support their child's early reading development. So it's trying to get the whole directorate focused on those priorities. So progress through the refreshed 3As will be through our Good Learning Places board. The identified service lead will be responsible for collating all that information. So for example, in the areas I'm leading on, I'll have those discussions with different areas of the directorate and then pass that through. And I think there's an expectation that we'd sort of be giving some updates to Scrutiny as well. Key performance indicators are attached to each priority, and I think we've really tried to target key performance indicators that are a realistic delivery expectation, that actually we can control those rather than just put in sort of random sort of performance out there. So for example, in terms of, we know that the overall long-term target is to get phonics outcomes improved, but there's a host of factors, not just that we can influence, but that schools influence, that the wider community influence about the outcomes and that, whereas actually our KPI is about, we can measure it and control it as a local authority. I think one of the things that, when I was thinking, I think one of the key questions that I thought that maybe Scrutiny would like to potentially pick up on is why we don't have disadvantage or EL as a specific priority area in there. But actually, if you look at what we've looked at that very carefully, and all those priorities, the significant number of young people that are affected by those priorities will actually come from our disadvantaged communities. So I think the priorities set out in the 3 years will target the barriers where disadvantaged children feature most, but actually that doesn't exclude working with all our children to raise outcomes for all our young people. So I think it's like I say, it's in our draft at the moment. I think it's a realistic plan to really sort of tighten and sharpen the focus for the directorate onto those priorities that you've discussed at Scrutiny over the last couple of years, and I think we've tried to like bring in some of those discussions that we've had, and I guess we're at that point where we'd welcome comments and any sort of things that people would like us to consider.
Okay, thank you, Dave. I've got a couple of hands straight up. So I saw Jackie first, and then Celia. Jackie.
Just one thing about you for fluency in reading skills. You've talked about 100 reading deep dive reviews. It's not clear to me, are you talking about 100 children or 100 schools you're going into? Because I think if it's 100 children or 100 schools, there is big difference.
Yeah, so and we can make that clear, that so that's with schools. So that's, yeah, so that's with we would target 100, and again we've that would be using our advisory capacity. So we've only got 3 or 4 advisors within our team. So it's, I think it's realistic over the period of time that we're doing this, but it would be with 100 with, so that would tend to be with sort of prep and write up and things. It would be like a day's visit to the school.
That you'll be picking school all the way around, so it won't be in one area. So it'll be a broad approach. And
I think one of the things you'll notice through the plan in terms of how learning improvement links with learning inclusion, that actually we'll look at the data as well to see which schools have got specific issues around reading and sort of attainment on entry. So it won't be just at those children at those schools, but actually that will be a big feature of that, of how we support those schools with the children that have got the lowest outcomes. So yeah, but yes, it would be schools from around the city. And also there's under our new sort of school improvement advisory plan this year, there's quite a focus on those schools that come in down into the Ofsted inspection window as well. So there'll be to support schools in terms of moving them.
Okay, thank you. Celia, please.
Thank you, Chair. Priority 4, and it's all children and staff working in learning settings are supported with their well-being. And we've mentioned in passing almost COVID and the huge impact it's had, and actually still having in schools, and the numbers, not surprisingly, well, I'm sure they don't surprise anyone around this table, are increasing, and staff, Helen will also be aware of this, it's causing stress and strain for staff in schools. Schools are not built necessarily to accommodate the ventilation advice and requirements to keep the staff and pupils safe, and it is having an impact on the the anxiety levels of school staff. And in particular, one of the areas that is really, I don't know how people are coping with it, but long COVID. And I am well aware that some of these school staff are almost certainly going to have to leave work. They are not able to cope. Many have been off ill for a long time. And apart from the physical concerns, it's the mental stress and anxiety. And I would suggest that the long COVID clinics may be doing, well, they will be doing sterling work, but the people are having waiting times of 11 and 12 weeks, probably longer now. There's not that support necessarily there. So is this support that is indicated here going to be able to meet those requirements? Because certainly we all know the National Health Service is buckling under the strain, and schools are finding it difficult, and the whole service for the local authority is under pressure. But apart from anything else, I wanted to bring that to people's attention, because the situation in schools is very, very pressured.
Yeah, I think you're right, Sheila. We've talked about this as well, haven't we, at JCC meetings in terms of the pressures that schools are facing. And I think one of the key things in terms of the 3 years refresh was to have an acknowledgement that actually well-being for children and staff is a significant issue going forward in terms of on the back of the pandemic, and how we as a local authority support our schools. So you'll notice in the plan that it's about extending that sort of head teacher support service that we've got in place at the moment, but it's also about how do we manage that strategically to enable governors to support head teacher well-being and staff well-being more effectively, because they've got an important role in that. How do we provide support for the senior leaders and the governors to support their staff in terms of their well-being? How do we make sure that we've got lots of different teams around the authority that deal with mental health and well-being? How do we draw that together so that actually the limited resource that we have, we can target it most effectively? So I think that's where this has been driven in terms of having it as a priority within the new 3 years refreshes. I don't think we've got the issue of health and well-being for not just education but right across society is enormous, isn't it? And I don't think we've got sort of the resources to manage every single problem, but this is a way that we can try and drive the resource that we've got into supporting schools, head teachers, governors and staff, and then children as well, as best as we can, knowing that there's the issue on the back of the pandemic.
Okay, thank you. So I just one point I wanted to make. So I think that the plan is very good. Lots of good things. I like that it's very specific and lots of things for us to hold you to down the line. It feels very department focused, and perhaps one challenge was how do we get the rest of the council and external partners engaged in doing their bits, because actually there's a lot of the engagements through housing, for instance, and other departments, that's a big opportunity. And I wonder if perhaps there might be a plan for it that you're about to tell us, or if not, perhaps it's something to reflect on and how we engage and mobilize others to do their bit.
Yeah, I think I won't give you an answer to that now, but it's certainly something that we can discuss as a team of how we reflect that better in the plan.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other comments, or again, are we happy to say that we support the plan? And again, we'll want to sort of have some regular check-ins to see how we're doing on that. Okay, right, thank you. So we are now moving on to item 11 in our meeting agenda today, which is a work schedule. So I don't know, Julie, first of all, do you want to just do the verbal update on the Ofsted improvement plan?
Yeah, so I'll just cover some actions that have been taken in relation to the 3 areas that Ofsted did highlight in the focused visit. So the first area was around quality and consistency of assessments and plans. And some of the actions that we've taken so far is that we've reviewed current training and development that offer for our managers. And we've developed some short bite-sized sessions for managers focused on specific areas of practice. And that's gone down really, really well in terms of having those bite-sized sessions and at different times of the day. We have also developed a mandatory action learning programme for team managers. And that covers a range of topics, including audit, assessment, supervision, decision-making, planning, a real focus on the impact, of our work on the lived experience of children and really monitoring and reviewing that. So real outcome-focused planning. We've also developed a new team manager, what we're calling an evidence portfolio. So really it's looking at a manager's first year in employment and thinking about actually, where would we want our team managers to be at the end of that first 12 months, in that role in terms of knowledge, experience. So that's something that we've done. We're also, we've reviewed the training for our social workers, again, in relation to assessment in particular. And as a result of that, we have commissioned David Shemmins, who is Professor of Child Protection Research at Kent University. And he's working with us to develop a mandatory programme, again, for team managers and social workers. There'll be 3 sessions, and those sessions will run up to 6 times a year. There'll be decision making for team managers, there'll be recording and report writing for social workers, and there'll be sessions looking at assessment and analysis skills for social workers. We're looking again at the, wanting to assure ourselves of the quality of assessments. So within that, we have ensured that we have got service delivery managers, team managers undertaking quarterly dip sampling of assessments, and that's in addition to the day-to-day work around supervision and oversight of individual cases. Also, we have engaged an external reviewer who is currently auditing some of our assessments across the directorate. And again, all of the learning from that will be taken back into our workforce and development programme. In relation to one of the second areas that inspectors highlighted was around the quality and impact of managerial oversight and supervision. So within that, we've really, I suppose, reiterated, reinforced our existing policy and procedures. As an example, every team manager is expected to have an observation by their service delivery manager in terms of supervision. For the service delivery manager to observe the team manager as they are delivering supervision. And again, really just to be able to give feedback in terms of, that critical friend in terms of future development areas. Within that as well, we do have a toolkit, and there's something about, I suppose, recognising new service delivery managers that have come into place, especially during the pandemic. We've had a number of new managers come into place, so really just refreshing the toolkit, making sure that everybody's aware of the tools that are available, and most importantly, using those effectively, and that they feel confident in using the tools. Again, we have reinforced our existing recording procedures. So we have our procedure which says that any case decision which is taken by any manager at any level should be recorded on the child's file on Mosaic within 48 hours. So some of this is just about, going back and refreshing policies and procedures that we have had in place for a number of years. We also really need to understand the barriers, so what is stopping or what's getting in the way of managers being able to record reflective supervision? Because I think, we're confident really that reflective supervision and outcome focused supervision does take place. I think what we see is that perhaps managers who are busy, who are under pressure, are not always recording that in detail, or perhaps it's the quality of recording which is also letting them down. So we've had a session with managers on the 21st of October just to explore the barriers and what's getting in the way. And that was facilitated by one of our multi-systemic therapy managers, and they're very skilled. They work to quite a clinical model, but it's part of their day-to-day work is recording outcome-focused reflective supervision. That was really well received, and we've got a wealth of feedback from managers which we'll now be able to take and help us to inform some of our programmes that we want to put in place to support them to be able to record their supervision effectively. We have linked pairs of team managers together. So we now have the process which is in place. It's been running, it's underway, where they are auditing respective casework. So they're not auditing their own work, and that's working very well. We've got moderation panels which have been set up. So we've got 3 panels. One which is pulling together managers at different levels in relation to area social work. We've got a panel which is looking at the work of the Child Health and Disability Service. And then we have a panel which is looking at our Children Looked After Service and our Care Leaver Service. So they're a group of managers who come together to moderate audits that have been undertaken. And within that, it's a real focus on practice. I think just the richness, the opportunity to come together and have those discussions, to think about, well, actually, does that look like really good, effective practice to you? If so, why? If not, why? And I think, again, it's about getting that challenge, but also, I suppose, upskilling really and supporting, some of our, in particular, some of our new managers within that process. We also, every week, we have a referral review meeting. So that's a meeting which really focuses on the work which has come through our front door in the previous week. And what we're doing at that review meeting is that they are really reviewing and auditing each week 9 completed strategy discussions. So really it's a multi-agency meeting. So we have police, we have health, we have children's social care. So really looking at strategy discussions that have taken place across the city in the preceding week, and looking at the quality of those, the quality of the discussion, the quality ultimately of the decision making that's come from those discussions and meetings. We also have SDMs now who are auditing and reviewing strategy discussions that have taken place in their areas each week. So service delivery managers are now required to look at strategy discussions that have taken place and again review the quality of those. We've also, and I think you'll see in the report that's been that was sent out yesterday, we have now got strategy discussions are now added to our social care weekly performance. And are monitored on a weekly basis. So team managers, service delivery managers, heads of service are looking at strategy discussions and looking at partner contributions to those strategy discussions. We've got an escalation process in place. So if, for whatever reason, colleagues are struggling to ensure that we have got partner contributions from health and police, there's now an escalation process with single point of contacts in health, in children's social work and police, where those issues can be highlighted, and hopefully dealt with on the day. What you'll see in the information that was sent through is that it is an improving picture in relation to partnership involvement. So really, from a baseline, looking at police involvement, it's improved from around 70% to 90%. Health's improved from a baseline which was around 42% to 74%. And the percentage of strategy discussions which are now have a contribution from health and police and children's social work service is currently at about 71%. So it's a steady improving picture, but it's something that we have got to be on constantly. We did have a event very recently, which was looking at process mapping. So it was an event that was held or led by health. It brought together police, children's social work colleagues, and we really looked at, from beginning to end, actually that process of requesting a strategy discussion, all of the administrative processes which which support that. It was a really helpful discussion, and it's identified really, I suppose, three key actions that we want to take forward and look at in more detail. So one of the questions really, it felt that the processes that which we have perhaps in health are a little bit clunky. So there's a question mark about actually, could the health triaging be quicker? Could it be simplified? And when I say health triage, children's social work service and police have a role in that because it happens at the front door. So how can we support each other actually to enable that to be a little bit quicker? Looking at the mechanism for arranging strategy meetings, and again, it was felt that actually sometimes that mechanism, of actually trying to get police, health, children's social work in the same place, whether it's in a room or whether it's virtually at the same time, the mechanism itself sometimes can be a barrier. So really looking to see actually, can we make that more streamlined? Can we make that more effective? And also something about agreeing on time scales, so when is it, do we have a really shared understanding of when, when we need an immediate response, and when perhaps we may have time for a more planned response, and across the three key partners, are we all looking at that at the same lens? So those three strands will be taken forward together, again, in a working group with police, with health and children's social work. We do have some additional capacity, which has been identified at the front door from health, which is really, really positive. And we also have a weekly strategic meeting, which is being held with police, health colleagues and children's social work service. I attend that, as does Ruth Terry, who's the Chief Officer for Social Work. That's been quite interesting because regionally there is a piece of work which has been undertaken by the police, so right across West Yorkshire, and that's fallen out of a recent HMIC inspection of West Yorkshire Police and the arrangements that they have and the interface that they have between themselves and different local authorities' front doors. So it's been a very helpful meeting because what it's identifying is that actually there's a number of real common challenges actually across the region, and it will help us to get some of that consistency going forward. And I'll probably leave it there, unless people have got any questions.
Okay, thank you, Julia. I think that was very comprehensive. So I don't know if there are any questions. Councillor Lay.
Very quickly, honest. There's a lot there, isn't there? And is it any wonder, and I'm going to be brutally honest, is it any wonder that health, education, police, etc., frontline workers like myself dread CQC, or in this case, Ofsted coming in? Because you've outlined a huge amount of stuff there that's going on. And I assume most of these will be picked up by very hardworking already frontline workers who, and not 2 minutes ago, we were talking about well-being for staff in schools, and we're just dumping more on them. More and more coming in at the top with less and less coming out the bottom. And I have huge, huge sympathy for your teams of staff who are actually on the front line, who is getting all this coming in at the top and thinking, bloomin' heck, where am I going to find the time? I'm already overworked.
We are so conscious of that. And I think, I think one of the privileges, if I'm being totally honest, to work in Leeds is that we do have that restorative culture, and that's not just within children and families, that is across the partnership. So I think when I've talked about some of the actions today, you'll see that a number of those have actually been about engaging our staff. So when I talked about really, what perhaps is getting in the way of team managers being able to record reflective supervision, it's recognising that they are busy, some will be new in post, there'll be a range of challenges. So actually, rather than us as a senior leadership team assuming what those barriers may be, it absolutely is about engaging our staff at every level in those conversations. I think the other thing, for me and for the senior leadership team and for the workforce as a whole is when we bring all of this back to children and families, actually, why do we want really good, high quality assessments? Why do we want outcome focused plans? It's because we want the best results for children and families. So actually, what we need to do as senior leaders, what we need to do collectively is to remind ourselves of why we get up in the morning. And actually, when we can get into the conversations, which we are doing through this work about practice, actually, it is really quite inspiring. And again, I think that's why we feel, really privileged as a leadership team to have the staff that we have, because despite the challenges, when we begin to talk about practice, they are inspired, and that's what we're all about. And that's what we want for Leeds.
Okay, thank you, Julie. And obviously we're going to keep our watching brief on this as we move forward. But thank you for the updates. So if I hand it to Angela just to run through the rest of the work schedule item.
Thank you, Chair. So as usual, the latest version of the Scrutiny Board's work schedule is appended to the report, Appendix 1. Since the last board meeting, though, just to make members aware, there have been a request made via the Directorate actually for the Scrutiny Board to start receiving the annual reports of the Leeds Standing Advisory Council on Religious Education. So this body has a statutory responsibility for RE curriculum and related matters in Leeds. Each year it does publish an annual report that has to be submitted to DFE by the 31st of December. So it is proposed that the latest annual report is brought back to the board about February, March time, just to provide an opportunity for members to be aware of the detail, to ask any questions, but also an opportunity to offer any views and perspectives in terms of what they'd like the Advisory Council to recognise in their current and future years, ensuring that there's joined up working in terms of priorities. So moving forward, it is proposed that it does remain an annual feature of the Scrutiny Board's work as well.
Okay, thank you, Angela. Okay, so item 12 is the date and time of next meeting. So our next full board meeting is not till the 26th of January 2022. I'm not doing Happy Christmas this early, but we do have some working groups in December, so we will have opportunities for mince pies and all that jazz. I can't. What's the date, Angela? Is it the 1st of December? We've got a working group, and the 16th, I think.
Yeah, the 1st is still provisional, but the 16th been confirmed.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll send further updates round on that. But apologies that it's run on longer than intended, but we've got through an awful lot of important things there. So I'm very grateful for everyone sticking with it, and thank you.